Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly into a world where the air itself feels sharp enough to cut skin. Where every breath turns into a small cloud that immediately gives away your position. And where the silence is so deep it hums in your ears. You are lying in snow that has already soaked through your coat. Your cheek pressed against frozen wood and metal. Your eye lined up with a narrowed tunnel of glass. Somewhere far ahead, a ruined city smolders, and somewhere even farther, history is deciding its next move. You are a Soviet sniper on the Eastern Front in World War II. And in a few moments, you'll understand why this job is less heroic movie montage and more slow, aching endurance. Spoiler alert, Ban Chak Kong Song Noi Do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cold is the first thing that truly introduces itself. Not the polite kind that makes you reach for a sweater, but the deep, bone-seeking cold that feels like it's trying to crawl inside your joints and set up permanent residence. You are arriving on the Eastern Front, somewhere near the long, scarred line that stretches from the forests of the north down toward the shattered cities of the south. The year is 1942, and winter has decided it will be an active participant in this war. Not just a backdrop, snow creaks faintly when you shift your weight, a sound that seems impossibly loud in the stillness, like stepping on bubble wrap in a library. You lie there and listen. Wind slides across broken walls and leafless trees, making a low, restless whisper. Far off, artillery rumbles, a sound so distant and constant that it's less like thunder and more like the slow breathing of some enormous, sleeping animal. This is the environment that has produced the Soviet sniper legend. The kind of place where names like Vasily Zaitsev will later be spoken with a mix of awe and myth. A well-known historical fact is that Soviet snipers played a crucial role in battles like Stalingrad, turning ruined buildings and frozen fields into deadly chessboards. What's less commonly mentioned is how many of them arrived at the front barely trained. Sometimes after only weeks of instruction, learning the rest through a brutal combination of observation and survival. Your training, such as it is, echoes in your mind as you settle in. You were taught how to crawl without lifting your body, how to move an inch at a time, how to control your breathing so your chest barely rises. You were taught that patience is not just a virtue. It is the entire job. Running is for infantry. Waiting is for you. Waiting, and not moving. And letting your muscles ache and your toes go numb until the cold feels less like pain and more like a distant, dull pressure. It's the kind of stillness that would drive most modern people crazy in about 5 minutes. Right after they check their phones for the 10th time and realize there's no signal in a bombed-out city. You bring the rifle up. Careful, slow. The Mosin Nagant feels solid, heavy, almost comforting in its weight, like a stubborn, old tool that has no intention of failing you as long as you respect it. This rifle is a piece of history in your hands. One of millions produced, simple, rugged, and brutally effective. A lesser-known detail is that many Soviet sniper rifles were selected from regular production and only later fitted with scopes. Chosen because their barrels happened to be more accurate than average. It's a bit like being told your laptop is special because it passed an extra quality check at the factory. Except the performance review here is written in life and death. Your breath fogs the scope for a moment. And you pause, letting it clear. The glass reveals a slice of the world, broken brick, a dark window, a line of shadow where something might move. You slow your breathing, counting silently, trying to make each exhale a soft, invisible thing. The discipline feels almost meditative, like a very intense form of mindfulness where the consequence of losing focus is not a wandering thought, but a bullet. Somewhere in your memory, an instructor's voice reminds you that the enemy is doing the same thing. German snipers are out there too, lying in their own patches of cold and ruin, watching, waiting, listening. This is not a one-sided hunt, it is a quiet duel of nerves. Historians still debate how much the famous sniper duels of the Eastern Front were romanticized after the fact, and how often they were, in reality, a series of brief, lethal encounters rather than prolonged personal battles. But whether myth or not, the feeling of being watched is real. A faint prickle between your shoulder blades that no amount of heavy clothing can block. Time stretches. Minutes lose their shape and start to feel like thick, slow-moving syrup. You become acutely aware of small sensations. The way the cold seeps through your gloves. The faint itch on your nose that you cannot scratch. The subtle tremor in your leg that you will to stop because movement is the enemy. It's a strange contrast to modern life, where impatience is measured in seconds and loading bars. Here, progress is measured in heartbeats you manage to keep quiet. A distant figure flickers at the edge of your vision, then is gone. You don't move. You tell yourself that false alarms are part of the job. That shadows and drifting snow can play tricks on tired eyes. You remember another piece of training. A small, almost poetic instruction. Let the world come to you. It sounds calm, gentle even, like advice from a yoga instructor. In reality, it means lying in frozen rubble and trusting that someone, somewhere, will eventually make a mistake. The cold continues its slow work. Your fingers feel thick, clumsy, and you flex them ever so slightly. Just enough to keep blood moving without revealing yourself. You think, not for the first time, that this would be an awful way to spend a weekend, let alone a war. No coffee breaks, no stretching sessions, no notifications to remind you to hydrate. Just you, the scope, the waiting, and the knowledge that a single loud mistake will announce you to the world. And as you lie there, at the very beginning of what will be a long, grinding experience, one thing becomes quietly clear. Being a Soviet sniper is not about dramatic music and heroic poses. It is about cold that never quite leaves. About patience that borders on suffering. And about a kind of focus that slowly, gently, but relentlessly, wears you down. This frozen arrival is only the first layer. The opening note in a long, quiet symphony of endurance, where the silence itself feels like it's leaning in, listening, and waiting to see how long you can last. You stay where you are, letting the cold settle into you like an unwanted blanket. Because the first real lesson of becoming a Soviet sniper is that movement is a luxury you can't afford. Training, you were told, is not about learning to shoot. Anyone can pull a trigger. It's about learning to wait. And waiting, in this war, is a skill that drains you in slow, invisible ways. Back at the training ground, far from the front, they taught you patience the way monks might teach silence. Long hours lying in damp grass or snow. Instructors pacing behind you, occasionally stopping to whisper corrections about breathing, posture, the tiny adjustments of elbow and shoulder. A well-known historical fact is that Soviet sniper schools emphasized fieldcraft as much as marksmanship, drilling soldiers to remain motionless for hours. What's less commonly known is that some trainees were made to lie still while ants crawled over their faces or rain soaked through their uniforms, just to break the instinct to swat, shiver, or shift. You remember one exercise in particular, watching a single patch of ground through your scope until your eyes burned and your thoughts started to wander. The point wasn't to see something. It was to learn what it felt like when nothing happened, to recognize the difference between real movement and the little hallucinations your brain invents when it's bored, cold, and desperate for stimulation. In a strange way, it was like being forced into the world's least relaxing meditation retreat, where instead of calming music you get distant artillery and the occasional crack of a rifle. They taught you how to slow your breathing until it barely disturbs the snow in front of your mouth, how to time a shot between heartbeats so the slight rise and fall of your chest doesn't nudge the barrel. They even taught you how to blink less, using the muscles around your eyes to moisten them without fully closing the lids. It sounds almost like a beauty routine. Reduce blinking for a smoother shot, except the stakes are a little higher than looking good on camera. A lesser-known detail is that Soviet instructors often came from hunting backgrounds, bringing techniques used for stalking animals into urban and battlefield settings. The idea was simple. Prey doesn't forgive mistakes. And neither does an enemy soldier. You were told to think like a hunter, to observe patterns, to notice how often a head appears in a window, how long a door stays open, how shadows change with the sun. It's less like playing a video game and more like doing a very slow, very tense puzzle where the pieces can shoot back. As you lie now in the cold, those lessons replay themselves in your body. You feel the urge to adjust your position, to ease the ache in your shoulder, to scratch the itch that has decided your nose is the perfect place to live. You don't. You let the sensations exist. Like background noise. This is the real training. Teaching your body that comfort is optional, but stillness is mandatory. You think about how strange it is that waiting can be more exhausting than running. Marching makes your muscles burn, but at least there's movement, a sense of progress. Waiting is different. It stretches time until it feels thin and fragile, like it might tear if you're not careful. Every second is a small test of discipline. Every minute asks the same question. Can you stay exactly as you are? Just a little longer? Historians still debate how much of a sniper's effectiveness came from formal training versus natural temperament. Some argue that patience and emotional control can't truly be taught, only refined. Others believe the Soviet system, with its relentless drills, could shape almost anyone into a competent marksman. Lying here, you feel the truth is probably somewhere in between. Training gives you the tools, but it's your own stubbornness, your ability to tolerate discomfort and silence, that keeps you from moving when every nerve is quietly begging you to. A faint sound drifts across the ruins, a piece of loose metal tapping in the wind. Or maybe something else. Your muscles tense, then settle again. You remind yourself not to react to every noise. In a city full of broken things, the world is constantly making small, meaningless sounds. The trick is learning which ones matter. Time continues its slow, heavy crawl. You find yourself counting breaths again, then losing count, then starting over. It's almost funny, in a tired way, how similar this feels to waiting for a slow download on a bad internet connection. You stare, you wait, you wonder if anything is happening at all. The difference is that here, the loading bar might suddenly appear in the form of a helmeted head in a window. And the next click you hear won't be from a mouse. Your instructor's voice echoes in your memory. The one who can wait longer usually wins. It sounds simple, almost comforting, but as the cold presses deeper and your muscles grow stiff, you realize what that really means. Winning, in this role, is not about speed or strength. It is about outlasting the urge to move, to blink, to give in to the small, human need for relief. And in that realization, you begin to understand why being a Soviet sniper is something you might come to regret. Not because the training is dramatic or the shooting is constant, but because so much of your life becomes this: lying still, wrapped in cold and silence, measuring your existence in breaths and heartbeats, and discovering that patience, when pushed far enough, can feel like its own quiet kind of punishment. The weight of the rifle settles into your shoulder like a familiar, stubborn presence, and you become acutely aware that this piece of wood and steel is now your closest companion. The Mosin Nagant rests against your cheek, cold through the thin fabric of your cap, its metal carrying the same chill as the air around you. You adjust your grip by a fraction of an inch, careful not to disturb the snow, and let your fingers curl around the stock as if you're holding onto a thick, frozen branch. This rifle is simple, almost austere. No sleek modern ergonomics, no soft padding, no friendly curves designed by committees and focus groups. Just straight lines, solid construction, and the quiet confidence of something built to work in mud, snow, and neglect. A well-known historical fact is that the Mosin Nagant was one of the most widely used rifles of World War II. Serving Soviet infantry and snipers alike from the opening days of the war to its bitter end. It was rugged, reliable, and produced in enormous numbers. A symbol of the Soviet approach to warfare: practical, tough, and uncompromising. But what you might not know is that sniper versions were often selected from regular production by test firing them and choosing the most accurate barrels. These chosen rifles were then fitted with PU scopes, relatively simple optics with limited magnification. In other words, your elite weapon is, at heart, an ordinary rifle that happened to be slightly better than its neighbors on the assembly line. It's like being told you're using a premium laptop that's really just a standard model that won the Silicon lottery. You bring your eye back to the scope, and the world narrows again. The circle of glass frames a broken window across the street, its edges lined with jagged brick. Light shifts inside, just a little, and your pulse quickens before you consciously calm it. The rifle amplifies everything: your breathing, your heartbeat, even the tiny tremor that runs through your hands when the cold digs in. You remember being taught to press the trigger not in a sudden jerk, but in a slow, steady squeeze, like closing a door quietly so it won't creak. The Mosin Nagant has its own personality. The bolt is stiff in the cold, requiring a deliberate, almost stubborn motion to cycle. The safety is awkward to operate. A small ring at the back of the bolt that demands strong fingers and patience. It is not a weapon designed for comfort. It is designed to work. Even when comfort has long since left the building. You think, with a faint, tired humor, that if modern customer reviews existed, they would probably say, 5 stars for reliability, -2 for user experience. You shift your focus down the street. Scanning slowly, the ruined buildings form a canyon of brick and shadow. Every window a potential eye. Every pile of rubble a possible hiding place. You know that German soldiers, perhaps even German snipers, are doing exactly what you are doing now. Peering through their own scopes. Their own narrow tunnels of vision. The idea is unsettling, like realizing someone might be watching you watch them. It's a strange kind of mutual awareness. A silent conversation conducted through stillness. A lesser-known detail about Soviet sniper rifles is that many were zeroed and adjusted by the snipers themselves in the field, using whatever tools and conditions they had. There were no climate-controlled ranges here. No perfectly measured distances marked with neat signs. You learn to account for wind by watching drifting snow or smoke. To judge distance by the size of familiar objects in your scope. To compensate for the way cold air slightly alters a bullet's flight. It's a blend of science, instinct, and experience, all wrapped up in a moment that lasts only as long as your breath. Your fingers feel stiff, and you gently flex them, just enough to keep sensation without creating movement that could be seen. The rifle's stock presses against your glove, and you can feel the faint texture of the wood through the fabric. This physical connection becomes grounding, almost comforting, in a world of chaos and noise. This one solid, predictable object gives you something to anchor to. The Mosin-Nagant's history stretches far beyond this street and this winter. It has been in service since the late 19th century. Through the Russo-Japanese War, the First World War, the Russian Civil War, and now this vast, grinding conflict against Nazi Germany. You are holding a piece of that long, heavy story, a tool that has passed through countless hands. Each with their own fears, hopes, and last thoughts. It's humbling, in a quiet way, to realize you are just one more link in a chain of users that spans generations. Historians still debate how much the simplicity and durability of weapons like the Mosin-Nagant contributed to the Soviet Union's ability to sustain its war effort, versus factors like sheer numbers and industrial capacity. Some argue that rugged design was crucial in the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front, while others point out that even the toughest rifle is only as effective as the person behind it. Lying here, you feel both truths at once. The rifle will work, even in this cold. The harder question is how long you can. Your cheek grows numb where it rests against the stock. You welcome the numbness. In a way, it dulls the ache, makes the position easier to maintain. The cold has a strange dual role here, enemy and ally. It saps your strength, but it also quiets sensation, turning pain into a distant, muffled signal. You imagine explaining this to someone in a warm room, and the contrast almost makes you smile. Yes, the freezing temperature is actually helping me relax. A faint movement flickers again in your scope. This time it's clearer, a shadow passing behind a shattered wall. a shape that doesn't quite match the broken geometry around it. You slow your breathing even more, letting the crosshairs settle. The rifle feels heavier now. Not physically, but in what it represents. Potential, consequence, finality. You don't fire. The shape disappears, and you tell yourself it might have been nothing. A trick of light, a drifting piece of debris. You return to waiting, to scanning, to the quiet partnership between your eye and the glass. The Mosin Nagant remains steady, patient, as if it has all the time in the world. In this stillness, you begin to understand why this rifle becomes more than just a tool. It becomes an extension of your senses, your focus, your will. It demands respect, discipline, and a kind of intimacy that is hard to describe. You learn its weight, its balance, the exact pressure needed to make it speak. And you also learn its silence, the long stretches where it says nothing at all. Being a Soviet sniper means living in this relationship. Hour after hour, day after day, you and the rifle, bound together by cold, patience, and the narrow view through a scope. It's a partnership forged not in comfort or choice, but in necessity. And as you lie there, feeling the solid presence of the Mosin Nagant against your shoulder, you sense that this companionship, so essential and so demanding, is another reason why the role you've stepped into is one you may one day wish you had never taken. The world you see through the scope is only half the battle. The other half is everything you do to make sure no one ever sees you at all. Camouflage, you've learned, is not just about blending in. It's about becoming part of the environment so completely that even you almost forget you're there. Your uniform is no longer the clean, recognizable shape it once was. It's layered with scraps of cloth, bits of netting, and strips torn from whatever you could find, sack material, old curtains, even pieces of wallpaper from the ruins. Over that, you've rubbed soot, dirt, and crushed brick dust, breaking up the outline of your body. Snow has settled into the folds, softening your edges further. You look less like a soldier now and more like an oddly shaped part of the landscape. An extra pile of debris that no one thought to clear. A well-known historical fact is that Soviet snipers often used improvised camouflage suits, sometimes called ghillie-like coverings, adapted to urban and winter environments. They learned to mask the straight lines of helmets and rifles, to dull anything that might catch the light. What's less commonly mentioned is how uncomfortable these disguises could be. Layers trapped moisture, made movement awkward, and turned every itch or cramp into a private test of will. Looking invisible was rarely comfortable. You are pressed into a shallow depression in the rubble, your body molded to its shape over hours of stillness. Muscles that would normally shift and stretch now have to accept whatever position they were given. Your left elbow rests on a chunk of broken brick, its edge digging through your sleeve. At first, it was sharp and annoying. Now it's just there. The pain has faded into a dull, distant signal, like a notification your brain has decided to mute. Stillness becomes a skill all its own. You learn to breathe without moving your shoulders. You learn to swallow without bobbing your throat. You even learn to let insects crawl across your face without reacting. Because a hand rising to brush them away would be far more dangerous than a few seconds of discomfort. It's the kind of discipline that feels almost unreal to people who have never had to practice it. Like telling someone not to blink for an hour and then explaining that blinking could get them killed. A lesser-known detail from sniper manuals of the time is how much emphasis was placed on natural movement, or rather, the lack of it. The human eye is exceptionally good at detecting motion, even when it can't clearly resolve shapes. So you become obsessed with micro-movements, the twitch of a finger, the slight sway of a barrel, the way heat from your body can sometimes disturb light snow or dust. You time everything to the rhythm of the environment, moving only when wind gusts, when distant explosions shake the ground, when smoke drifts across your line of sight. It's a strange kind of dance, one where your partner is the world itself. The wind shifts, you shift, the light changes, you wait, the sounds of battle rise and fall, and you tuck your smallest motions into those waves, hiding them the way a swimmer hides strokes beneath the surface of rough water. From the outside, you are still. From the inside, you are constantly, carefully adjusting. You think, not without a touch of dry humor, that this is the opposite of modern, active lifestyles. No step counters, no standing desks, no reminders to stretch, just an unspoken rule. The less you move, the longer you live. It's a fitness plan with a very specific, very final performance review. Historians still debate how much of a sniper's success came from equipment and how much from fieldcraft like this, camouflage, positioning, and patience. Some argue that a good hiding place is more important than a good rifle, because an unseen shooter controls the engagement. Others point out that even perfect camouflage fails if discipline slips for a single second. Lying here, half buried in cold and shadow, you feel the truth of both. The environment can hide you, but only if you become as quiet and unremarkable as it is. Your body begins to feel less like something you inhabit and more like a shape that has been placed somewhere and left. Sensations blur at the edges. The cold numbs. The pressure points fade into background noise. And time loses its sharpness. It's almost peaceful, in a deeply unnatural way, like becoming a statue that can think and breathe. And yet, beneath that calm, there is a constant, low-level tension, the knowledge that at any moment, the stillness could be broken, that a flash, a crack, a sudden movement could turn this quiet, camouflaged existence into chaos. You are invisible, but you are not invulnerable. Somewhere out there, another pair of eyes may be searching for the slightest hint that you are more than just another lump of snow and brick. So you stay perfectly still. You let the cold and the silence wrap around you. You let your outline dissolve into the ruin. Because in the life of a Soviet sniper, camouflage and stillness are not just techniques. They are a way of existing, a temporary agreement with the world. If you can blend in well enough, if you can move little enough, perhaps you will be allowed to remain here, breathing, watching, waiting, just a little longer. The moment arrives without ceremony. No drum roll, no swelling music, no clear signal that says, "This is it." It's just a small change in the picture framed by your scope. A shape that doesn't belong to the broken geometry of bricks and beams. A helmet edge, maybe, a shoulder, something that moves with purpose rather than wind. Your breathing slows even more, as if your body has decided to cooperate without being asked. The crosshairs drift, then settle. The world narrows to that tiny intersection of lines. And everything else, the cold, the ache in your elbow, the faint ringing in your ears, slides into the background like a dimmed app on a screen. This is your first real shot. A well-known historical fact is that many Soviet snipers recorded their first confirmed kill with a mix of pride and shock. Official doctrine emphasized results, numbers, and contribution to the larger battle. Success was celebrated, tallied, sometimes even published in unit newspapers. What's less commonly talked about is how unprepared many were for the emotional weight of that first moment. No matter how much training they'd had, pulling a trigger on a range is one thing. Doing it when you know, with absolute certainty, that a living person is on the other end of the line of sight is something else entirely. Your finger begins its slow, deliberate squeeze. Not a jerk, not a snap, a steady increase in pressure. Like gently closing a heavy door so it won't slam. You time it between heartbeats. Just as you were taught. For a fraction of a second. The crosshairs are perfectly still. Then the rifle speaks. The recoil is firm but familiar. The sound sharp and flat in the cold air. Through the scope. The image jumps, then settles again. The shape you were watching is no longer upright. It collapses out of frame, as if the scene itself has decided to erase it. There is no immediate rush of triumph. No cinematic slow motion, just a sudden, almost awkward quiet, like a conversation that has ended too abruptly. Your ears ring faintly. And the smell of burned powder drifts back to you. Sharp and metallic, cutting through the sweet, cold air. You stay still. Training takes over. You don't lift your head. You don't move the rifle. You scan the area around where the figure fell, searching for any sign of reaction, any hint that someone else has noticed. Counter snipers, comrades. Movement in windows. Nothing, at least for now. Inside, something shifts. It's not exactly guilt, and it's not exactly pride. It's more like a sudden awareness of weight, of the fact that a line has been crossed. Even if the world around you looks exactly the same, you are now someone who has done this. The thought settles quietly. The way snow settles on ruins. Soft but persistent. A lesser-known detail from Soviet sniper memoirs is how often the first kill was remembered with strange clarity. The color of a scarf. The angle of a head. The way a figure leaned before falling. Not the grand context of the battle. But the small, almost trivial details. The mind, it seems, latches onto these fragments as if trying to anchor itself in something concrete when confronted with something overwhelming. You become aware of your own heartbeat again. A little faster now, thudding softly against your ribs. You slow it, counting breaths, letting the rhythm even out. The discipline returns, like a well-practiced routine. There may be more targets. There may be danger. This is not the time to drift. And yet, in the quiet that follows, a thought slips in. Somewhere, not so far away, someone will notice an absence. A position that is suddenly empty. A voice that doesn't answer. The war will absorb it, record it as a loss, and move on. You, however, will carry the memory of this specific, narrow view through glass. A faint, tired kind of humor crosses your mind, the sort that appears when the brain tries to protect itself. You think about how people talk about firsts in life: first job, first apartment, first time driving alone. This is a first too, though it will never appear on a list you share at a party. It's a milestone no one asks about, but one that quietly reshapes the way you see the world. Historians still debate how snipers psychologically processed their work over time. Some argue that repeated exposure led to emotional numbing, a professional detachment that made each shot feel like a task rather than an event. Others suggest that memories accumulated, layering one over another, creating a hidden burden that surfaced later in dreams, in sudden flashes of recollection, in a sense of unease that never quite went away. Lying here, you can't know which path your own mind will take. You only know that this moment has etched itself into you. Whether you welcome it or not, you shift your focus back to the street. Scanning again, the environment hasn't changed. Snow still clings to ledges. Smoke still drifts in thin ribbons. The ruins are still ruins. It's almost unsettling how ordinary everything looks. How easily the world accommodates what just happened. A distant explosion rolls through the air, low and heavy, and you use the vibration to make a tiny adjustment, easing the pressure on your shoulder without revealing yourself. The rifle settles back into its familiar position. The partnership resumes. Watch, wait, breathe. Another small, inward joke flickers. You've just performed what, in official terms, would be called a successful engagement. Yet your reward is more waiting, more cold, more silence, no applause, no instant feedback, no achievement badge popping up in the corner of your vision. Just the knowledge that somewhere, your name might eventually be added to a tally. A number that will be used to inspire others or to measure effectiveness. The reality is quieter than that. It's just you, alone with your thoughts and the steady presence of the rifle. The adrenaline fades, leaving behind a soft, hollow feeling, like the echo after a loud sound. You fill it with routine, with scanning and counting and controlled breathing. Your first confirmed shot has been taken. The legend of the sniper often begins here, in stories and statistics, but your experience of it is not legend. It is a brief, sharp moment followed by a long, silent return to stillness, and in that return, you begin to understand that the role you've stepped into is not defined by dramatic peaks, but by the quiet spaces between them, spaces where memory settles, where consequences linger, and where the cold and the waiting patiently prepare you for the next time the world in your scope changes shape. The ruins around you are no longer just broken buildings. They are a landscape shaped by a single name that seems to echo in every shattered wall and collapsed staircase: Stalingrad. Even if you are not in the city itself, its shadow stretches far, a symbol of what this war has become: close, personal, and merciless. The air carries the same mix of smoke, frost, and old dust, and every structure looks as though it has been peeled open, its insides exposed to wind and gunfire like the ribs of a gigantic, wounded animal. You shift your gaze through the scope, tracing the edges of doorways, the dark mouths of stairwells, the jagged silhouettes of factory floors that once held machines and now hold silence. A well-known historical fact is that the Battle of Stalingrad became the most famous sniper battlefield of the war, turning urban ruins into a three-dimensional hunting ground. Snipers operated from rubble piles, chimneys, attics, even from inside wrecked machinery, using elevation and shadow to control entire streets with a single rifle. What's less commonly talked about is how disorienting these spaces were. Buildings that once had clear floors and walls were now tilted, collapsed, or hollowed out. Staircases led nowhere. Windows opened into empty air. You could enter a structure on what used to be the third floor and walk out on what had once been the ground. The city had become a puzzle with no stable reference points. And you had to learn it the way a blind person learns a room, by feel. By memory. By the subtle differences in echo and light. You imagine moving through such a place. Inching along corridors filled with fine, choking dust. Every step carefully placed to avoid loose bricks that could betray your position. The smell would be a blend of burned wood, oil, and something faintly metallic, the scent of long-dried blood soaked into plaster. Even in winter, the city never quite smelled clean. It carried the memory of fire and collapse. A lesser-known detail from Soviet accounts is that some snipers memorized entire sections of ruined buildings, mapping them mentally. Which windows faced which streets, how sunlight moved across them during the day, where shadows pooled in the afternoon, and which angles offered the best fields of fire. This mental map became as important as any physical one. Lose track of where you were in that maze, and you could easily wander into an exposed corridor or a sightline already claimed by an enemy rifle. Historians still debate how many of the famous duels in Stalingrad were prolonged personal contests and how many were simply brief encounters later woven into dramatic stories. What is not debated is the intensity of the environment itself. The city forced snipers into a constant state of alertness, where the vertical dimension mattered as much as the horizontal. Threats could come from above, below, or straight ahead, and every dark opening felt like a question mark. You picture yourself settling into a firing position in a ruined apartment. The wallpaper hanging in torn strips. Faded flowers and patterns fluttering slightly in the cold draft. A child's drawing might still cling to one wall, absurdly out of place among sandbags and broken furniture. The contrast would be jarring, signs of ordinary life frozen in time. Now sharing space with rifles and observers who speak only in whispers and hand signals. A soft, tired humor crosses your mind. This is the worst real estate tour imaginable. Spacious, great views, excellent ventilation. Just ignore the part where everything is trying to kill you. The thought fades, but it helps for a second, like a small mental stretch in a world that allows almost no physical ones. The famous names, Zaitsev, Koenig, and others, hover in the background of your thoughts. Propaganda will later turn their actions into stories of skill and courage, of patient hunters outwitting one another among the ruins. A well-known historical fact is that these stories were used to boost morale, to show that individual expertise could make a difference even in a massive, grinding battle. What's less often emphasized is how many unnamed snipers shared the same conditions. The same cold, the same fear, without ever becoming legends. You remind yourself that every pile of rubble could hide someone like you. Lying just as still, watching through their own scope, waiting for a mistake. The city is not just a setting, it is an active participant, offering concealment and danger in equal measure. Brick and shadow become tools, as important as the rifle itself. Historians still argue about how much the urban environment favored defenders or attackers, about whether the ruins ultimately gave snipers an advantage or simply multiplied the risks for everyone involved. From your quiet, hidden perspective, The answer feels less theoretical. The ruins are a place where lines of sight are short, where sound echoes unpredictably, and where survival depends on knowing not just where you are, but how the space around you breathes and changes with light and time. As you continue to watch, letting the cold and the silence settle back in, the image of Stalingrad's shattered walls lingers. It is a reminder that being a sniper here is not just about marksmanship. It is about learning to live inside destruction, to read it, to become part of it, and in doing so, you realize that the ruins are slowly working their way into you as well, shaping your thoughts and habits until, like the city itself, you are a mixture of endurance, damage, and the quiet, stubborn will to remain standing. Night deepens, and with it, the city reveals a different layer of life, one that doesn't care about uniforms, flags, or front lines. As the light fades and the cold tightens its grip, small movements begin to stir in the rubble around you. At first, you think it's just shifting debris, the wind playing with loose paper and broken wood. Then you see it, a quick, low dart of fur along a wall, a glint of eyes that vanishes as fast as it appeared. Rats. A well-known historical fact is that the ruins of cities like Stalingrad became overrun with rats during the battle. The destruction of buildings, the abundance of food scraps, and, grimly, the presence of unburied bodies created perfect conditions for them to thrive. They moved through cellars, trenches, and shattered rooms with an ease that no human could match, becoming a constant, unwelcome presence for soldiers on both sides. What's less commonly mentioned is how bold these animals became. Accounts describe rats so accustomed to noise and human presence that they would run across sleeping soldiers, nibble at rations, and even gnaw on leather straps and boots. In a place where artillery thundered day and night, a small creature learned that most of the giants around it were too exhausted to react. You, lying still for hours, are just another warm shape in a cold landscape. And warmth is valuable. You feel a faint, tickling brush against your sleeve. Your body wants to flinch, to jerk away, to swat whatever it is. You don't, you can't. The discipline that kept you from scratching an itch now has to handle something far more unsettling. You tell yourself it's probably just debris shifting. Your mind, however, is not entirely convinced. The cold adds its own layer of discomfort. It seeps through every gap in your clothing, every place where fabric has thinned or bunched. Your toes feel like solid blocks of ice. Your fingers stiff and incooperative. Breathing too deeply makes your chest ache. The air biting at the inside of your lungs. You've heard of frostbite, seen the pale, waxy skin on comrades who stayed exposed too long. The idea that your own skin might be slowly numbing into something you won't feel until it's too late is not exactly relaxing. A lesser-known detail from Eastern Front medical reports is how often minor cold injuries went unrecorded. Numbness, tingling, patches of skin that lost color. These were considered part of the environment. Not necessarily something worth a formal note unless it became severe. Historians still debate how much the true toll of cold-related injuries was underestimated. Hidden behind more dramatic statistics of combat wounds and fatalities. You shift your focus, not your body, reminding yourself to wiggle your toes ever so slightly when you can. To tense and release small muscle groups without visible movement. It's a strange kind of internal exercise routine. Micro-workouts designed to keep blood flowing while the rest of you remains a statue. Somewhere in another life, this might be called isometric training. Here, it's called not losing your feet. A soft, inward joke surfaces. You're basically doing the world's least advertised spa treatment, cryotherapy with added rodents. You almost smile, then stop yourself, because even the faintest movement of your face could shift your position. Humor, here, has to stay entirely inside. The rats continue their quiet patrols. You hear faint scratching, the tiny click of claws on brick, the soft rustle of something being dragged. They move with confidence, as if the ruins belong to them now. In a way, they do. Armies come and go. Buildings rise and fall. The small, adaptable creatures remain, thriving in the margins of human catastrophe. A well-known historical reality is that soldiers on both sides complained about vermin as much as about the enemy. Lice, fleas, and rats were constant companions, spreading disease and eroding morale. What's less often discussed is how this constant exposure to filth and infestation affected the mind. The sense that there was no truly clean, safe space, no moment when you could let your guard down, even in rest, added another layer of strain to already exhausted nerves. You feel something else now, not a rat, but the slow, deep ache of cold settling into your bones. It's not sharp pain, more like a heavy, dull pressure, as if the temperature itself is leaning on you. Your thoughts slow, your reactions feel slightly delayed. You have to remind yourself to stay alert, to keep scanning, to not let the cold lull you into a dangerous kind of stillness. Historians still argue about how much the environment, cold, vermin, constant noise, contributed to combat stress compared to direct fighting. Some suggest that the relentless physical discomfort wore soldiers down as much as fear of bullets, creating a background of fatigue that never fully lifted. Lying here, feeling the cold and hearing the small, persistent sounds of life in the ruins. You can believe it. It's hard to feel heroic when you're more concerned about keeping your fingers from freezing and your nerves from jumping at every scratch. Another tiny movement brushes near your boot. This time, you're fairly sure what it is. You imagine explaining this to someone back home. Yes, the enemy is dangerous, but the wildlife is also very enthusiastic. The thought is absurd enough to almost be comforting. Almost. You force your attention back through the scope. The street is empty. The windows dark. Snow has begun to fall more steadily now. Soft flakes drifting down and settling on rubble, on broken beams, on your own camouflage. It muffles sound, creates a strange, padded silence, like the world has been wrapped in cotton. The rats, however, do not seem bothered. They continue their quiet business beneath the soft blanket. The cold, the vermin, the endless waiting. None of these will appear in triumphant headlines or propaganda posters. They are the unglamorous details, the background texture of a sniper's life. Yet they shape your experience as surely as any firefight. They test your discipline, your patience, your ability to remain focused when everything in you wants to seek warmth and safety. As you lie there, breathing carefully, letting the snow gather on your shoulders, you begin to understand that surviving as a Soviet sniper is not just about facing an enemy with a rifle. It is about enduring an environment that is quietly, persistently hostile. An environment where even the smallest creatures and the coldest air seem to conspire to remind you how fragile you are. How out of place a warm, living body can feel in a world of ruins and winter. And in that realization, the regret hinted at in the title starts to take a clearer shape. Not a dramatic, single moment of fear, but a slow accumulation of discomforts and dangers, frozen fingers, crawling shadows, the constant, gnawing sense that the world around you is just a little too eager to reclaim the warmth and life you're trying so hard to hold on to. You are no longer truly alone out here, even when it feels that way. Somewhere close. Close enough that a whispered word could reach you if the wind were kind. Is your spotter. He lies in his own shallow nest of rubble and snow. His binoculars trained on the same world you watch through your scope. His ears tuned to the same distant rumbles and cracks. Between the two of you stretches a thin, invisible line of trust, tighter than any rope, more fragile than glass. A well-known historical fact is that Soviet snipers usually worked in pairs, the shooter and the observer. The spotter's job was to find targets, watch for enemy movement, judge distance and wind, and, perhaps most importantly, look for other snipers, while you stare through a narrow tunnel of glass. Your partner keeps the wider picture in view, scanning rooftops, windows, and shadows that you might miss. In theory, you are a single, coordinated system, two sets of eyes, one trigger. In practice, it means that your life depends on someone else noticing what you can't. You feel his presence more than you see it. A faint shift in the air when he adjusts his position. A barely audible click of metal when he steadies his binoculars. Sometimes, when the wind carries sound just right, you catch a whisper of breath that is not your own. It's oddly comforting, like knowing there's another heartbeat keeping time with yours in this frozen stillness. He taps your boot once. Very lightly. It's the signal you agreed on. Movement in the upper left sector. You don't swing your rifle immediately. You wait for the second tap that will tell you whether it's worth committing your narrow field of vision. The pause feels long, but it's only a second. Then comes the second tap. You shift, slow and careful, bringing the scope toward the indicated area. The ruined facade of a building fills your view. Its windows dark, its edges sharp against the snow. You see nothing at first. Then, a flicker of motion, a shadow that lingers a fraction too long to be just smoke. Your spotter murmurs a distance estimate, barely more than air against your ear. You adjust the elevation, the tiny, precise movements of your fingers translating his words into a change in angle. This quiet, cooperative dance is what turns two tired, cold soldiers into something far more dangerous than either could be alone. A lesser-known detail from Eastern Front accounts is how deeply personal these partnerships could become. Spotters and snipers often trained together, ate together, froze together. They learned each other's breathing rhythms, their habits, their unspoken signals. Some pairs developed such seamless coordination that they could communicate with nothing more than a shift of shoulders or the slightest change in posture. It was less like working with a colleague and more like sharing a single, two-headed awareness. And when something went wrong, it went wrong for both of you. You remember being told, quietly, that losing a spotter was one of the hardest experiences a sniper could face. Not only because it meant the sudden absence of protection and information, but because it broke a bond built under extreme conditions. Historians still debate how much this intense reliance on a single partner contributed to the psychological strain of sniper work. Some argue that it created resilience through mutual support. Others suggest it made loss more devastating, concentrating grief and fear into a very small, very personal circle. Your spotter shifts again and whispers about a possible counter-sniper position. A glint of light that could be glass, could be a scope, could be nothing at all. You both freeze, letting the moment stretch, watching, listening. The cold presses in. Somewhere, a building creaks as it settles. The snow continues its soft, endless fall. A faint, tired joke flickers through your mind. This is the world's most stressful game of I Spy. Except the loser doesn't get teased. They get, well, you don't even finish that thought. Humor, like movement, has to be handled carefully. You trust him to watch your blind spots, the places your scope cannot easily reach. He trusts you to take the shot cleanly if one presents itself. It's a simple arrangement, but it carries enormous weight. One missed signal, one misunderstood whisper, and the balance tips. A well-known historical example often cited is how Soviet sniper teams in Stalingrad covered each other's approaches and retreats, allowing them to relocate after firing and avoid enemy retaliation. What's less often mentioned is how exhausting this constant coordination could be. You are not just managing your own fatigue and cold. You are also attuned to another person's state. Listening for changes in tone. Watching for signs of strain or distraction. It's like being in a two-person orchestra where both musicians must stay perfectly in time, even when their fingers are numb and their minds are foggy. You glance, just once, out of the corner of your eye, toward where he lies. You don't see his face, only the vague outline of his form, half buried, as still as you are. It's enough. The knowledge that he is there steadies you, anchors you in the present. Another whisper reaches you. Wind, left to right, slight. You make the tiny adjustment, the kind that would be meaningless at short range but vital here. The crosshairs settle again. The shadow in the window has not moved. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's someone else doing exactly what you are doing now. Waiting, trusting their own partner to keep them safe. A soft, inward thought surfaces. This is the most intense group project imaginable. Two people, one grade, very unforgiving teacher. You almost smile, then remind yourself that facial muscles are still muscles, and muscles move. Historians still argue about how often spotters and snipers swapped roles, and how rigidly the division of labor was maintained. Some units rotated regularly to prevent fatigue and tunnel vision. Others kept pairs fixed, believing that familiarity improved performance. Lying here, you feel the logic of both. Knowing your partner deeply can be a strength. So can stepping back from a role that slowly, quietly consumes your focus. For now, though, the roles are clear. He watches wide, you watch narrow. He speaks in distances and directions. You translate them into angles and pressure. Together, you create a fragile bubble of awareness in a city that offers very little safety. The shadow in the window shifts, then vanishes. No shot is taken. The moment passes, leaving behind only the faint echo of tension. Your spotter relaxes slightly, and you feel that relaxation ripple through you as well. like a shared exhale. In this frozen, ruined world, trust is not an abstract concept. It is a practical, immediate thing, measured in taps on a boot, whispered numbers, and the confidence that someone else is seeing what you cannot. It is one of the few warm elements in a life defined by cold and distance. And yet, that very closeness carries its own weight. To depend so completely on another person is to make yourself vulnerable in a way no helmet or wall can prevent. It means that every near miss, every sudden silence from the spotter's position, will echo far beyond the physical danger, striking at the small, carefully guarded sense of connection you've built. As you settle back into stillness, eyes forward, rifle steady, you feel that bond humming quietly in the background of your awareness. It is a source of strength, and a potential source of pain. Another reason, added to the cold and the waiting and the ever-present threat. Why being a Soviet sniper is not just a test of skill, but of how much trust your nerves and your heart can bear without finally, softly, giving way. The knowledge that you are not the only one hunting settles in with a new, sharper edge, somewhere out there, beyond the broken walls and drifting snow. Another pair of eyes is doing exactly what yours are doing now, measuring, waiting, searching for the smallest mistake. Counter snipers, the mirror image of your own role. The quiet reminder that the game you're playing is never one-sided. A well-known historical fact is that both the Red Army and the German Wehrmacht invested heavily in sniper training on the Eastern Front. As Soviet snipers began to make their presence felt, the Germans responded by deploying their own specialists, turning ruined cities and frozen fields into arenas of patient, invisible duels. These encounters were not always the dramatic, long-lasting showdowns later described in memoirs and films, but the awareness of them shaped every movement you made. You feel it now in the way your muscles remain tense even during moments of apparent calm. The way your eyes linger a fraction longer on dark windows, on piles of rubble that seem just a little too orderly. The way your mind keeps asking, if I were watching me, where would I hide? It's an unsettling exercise, like trying to outthink your own reflection. Your spotter shifts slightly and whispers a warning about a possible glint. Far off and high, sunlight, weak as it is in winter, can still betray glass or metal for a split second. You know the rule. Anything that flashes might be a scope. And anything that might be a scope might be attached to someone who has been lying just as still as you. Perhaps for even longer. You don't look directly at the glint. Instead, you scan the area around it, searching for context, broken beams, twisted rebar, the outline of a collapsed roof. You're looking for a shape that doesn't quite belong, a line too straight, a shadow too deliberate. It's like trying to spot a typo in a page of text you've been staring at for hours. Your eyes ache. Your concentration wavers, and yet you force it back into focus. A lesser-known detail from Eastern Front accounts is how often counter-sniper work relied on sound rather than sight. The faint crack of a distant shot, the echo bouncing between buildings, could be used to triangulate a position. Some spotters became adept at judging distance and direction by ear alone. Even in the confusing acoustics of ruined cities, historians still debate how reliable these methods were in practice. But there is no doubt they were used, especially when visibility was poor. You and your spotter listen, The world is never truly silent here. Wind moans through gaps in brick. Loose metal taps and scrapes. Somewhere, far away, artillery mutters like distant thunder. You learn to sort these sounds, to file them mentally into environment and possible danger. It's not an exact science. It's more like pattern recognition, a skill honed by long exposure and quiet fear. A small, tense part of you imagines what it would be like to be on the other side of this invisible line. Another sniper, another spotter, lying in their own patch of cold, watching a different slice of the same ruined street. Perhaps they are thinking the same thoughts, making the same tiny adjustments, feeling the same stiffness in their fingers. The symmetry is strange, almost poetic, if it weren't so dangerous. You recall stories from training about counter-sniper tactics, setting up decoys, using helmets on sticks, tossing small objects to draw attention, waiting for the telltale flash of a shot. A well-known historical practice was the use of sniper traps, where a visible target was deliberately exposed to lure an enemy sniper into revealing their position. What's less often mentioned is how nerve-wracking it was to be the one holding the decoy, or the one waiting for the response, knowing that the first sound you might hear could be the last. Your spotter signals again, this time more urgently. A shape has appeared in a high window. Just for a moment, you bring your scope up, slow and careful, aligning with the indicated sector. The building is half collapsed. Its upper floors open to the sky. Snow clings to broken beams, and shadows pool in the corners. You scan, inch by inch, letting your eye adjust to the contrast. There, something different, a darker patch where the snow should be. A straight line where everything else is jagged. It could be debris, it could be a trick of light, or it could be the edge of a rifle barrel, wrapped in cloth, perfectly still. Your breathing becomes a metronome again. In, out, in, out. You don't rush. You know that a counter-sniper is waiting for exactly that. Impatience. The urge to resolve uncertainty by acting. The standoff stretches, a silent question hanging in the air between two unseen people. A faint, inward joke tries to surface. This is the worst kind of staring contest. The kind where blinking has very permanent consequences. You keep it to yourself, of course. Humor is a private luxury here. Something you carry inside like a small, warm stone. Minutes pass. The shape does not move. Your muscles begin to protest. A dull ache spreading through your shoulder and neck. You ignore it. You let the discomfort exist without responding. This, too, is part of the duel. Whoever breaks stillness first may lose more than pride. Historians still debate how often such prolonged counter-sniper standoffs actually ended with one side successfully identifying and eliminating the other. Some argue that many simply dissolved into uncertainty, with both parties eventually relocating to avoid being the one who stayed too long. Others point to documented cases where patience and careful observation led to decisive shots. From your perspective, the distinction feels academic. What matters is that the possibility is always there, shaping every second you remain in position. Your spotter whispers again, barely audible. No movement. Might be nothing. The words are cautious, not dismissive. You both know that nothing and something dangerous can look very similar at a distance. You decide to wait a little longer. Then shift to a slightly different angle, using a fold in the rubble to mask the movement. It's a calculated risk, a small change that might reveal more without revealing you. You move when a gust of wind rattles loose debris, letting the noise cover the subtle scrape of your gear. The view changes just enough. The dark patch resolves into a broken beam, its surface stained and shadowed. No barrel, no cloth, no eye behind glass, just another piece of the city's skeleton. Relief comes, but it's muted. You don't celebrate. You simply absorb the information and return to your scan. The world has not become safer, it has only, for the moment, not become more dangerous. This constant dance with uncertainty is what counter-snipers bring into your life. It's not just the risk of being shot. It's the mental load of knowing that someone, somewhere, is actively trying to find you, using the same skills and patience you pride yourself on. It's like playing chess where both players are invisible, and the board is a maze of ruins and shadows. A well-known historical outcome of this cat-and-mouse dynamic was the development of ever more refined concealment and deception techniques on both sides. What's less often highlighted is the toll this took on concentration and nerves. Staying alert for hours, days, weeks, with the awareness that a single mistake could be fatal, created a background of tension that never fully lifted. You feel it now, that low-level hum of vigilance, like a device that's always on, always drawing power, even in moments of relative calm. It drains you. It makes your thoughts circle. Your senses strain. Your body remain half-braced for a threat that may or may not appear. As you settle back into stillness, the image of the possible counter-sniper fades. But the idea does not. It lingers, a quiet presence at the edge of your awareness. A reminder that the role you've taken on is defined not only by what you see and do, but by what you imagine others might be seeing and planning. In this frozen, ruined world, you are never just a hunter. You are also the hunted. And living with that dual identity, lying still, watching, waiting, knowing that someone else may be doing the same to you, is another layer of the experience that makes the romantic image of the sniper dissolve into something far more tense, far more fragile, and far more exhausting than any legend would ever suggest. The city teaches you new ways to disappear. Not the kind of hiding that comes from lying low in grass or snow, but the kind that uses height, angles, and broken architecture to turn you into a shadow among shadows. Urban sniper work is a three-dimensional puzzle. Streets are no longer flat lines, they are corridors watched from above, below, and diagonally across. Every floor, every beam, every collapsed stairwell is a potential perch or a potential trap. A well-known historical fact is that in places like Stalingrad and later in cities across Eastern Europe, Soviet snipers used elevated and unconventional firing positions, chimneys, factory gantries, church towers, wrecked cranes, and even the insides of smashed boilers. Height gave a wider field of view and unexpected angles of fire, making it harder for enemy infantry to guess where a shot had come from. What's less commonly talked about is how uncomfortable and dangerous many of these positions were. Chimneys were cramped, black with soot, and often unstable. Factory skeletons swayed slightly in the wind. Church towers, once symbols of peace, became exposed islands of stone that could draw artillery if spotted. You weren't choosing these places because they were safe. You were choosing them because they were useful. You imagine climbing into one of these positions. Fingers numb, boots scraping softly against brick as you ease yourself into a narrow space behind a broken wall. The smell of old smoke and damp dust clings to everything. You wedge yourself between two beams. Just enough room to bring the rifle up. Just enough to breathe. Below, the street is a ribbon of shadow and snow, broken by craters and abandoned equipment. From here, you can see movement that would be invisible from the ground. The top of a helmet as someone peeks around a corner. The slow crawl of a figure hugging a wall. Your spotter settles in nearby, perhaps on a lower level or across the street, covering approaches you can't see. The vertical separation makes communication trickier. A whisper might not carry. A tap on the boot is no longer possible. You rely on prearranged signals. A tug on a line. A flicker of light briefly shown and hidden. A soft click that means, look left, or look down. It's coordination by minimalist design. Like trying to text with one bar of signal and a dying battery. A lesser-known detail from urban sniper operations is how often firing ports had to be carefully prepared. A hole in a wall might be enlarged just enough to let a barrel pass without exposing the shooter. The edges would be smooth, sometimes lined with cloth, to prevent dust from puffing out when the rifle fired, a small cloud that could betray the position. Even the direction of the muzzle blast mattered, as reflected sound could echo in unpredictable ways, pointing an enemy straight back to you. You learn to think about how sound travels in ruins. A shot fired from a chimney might echo off nearby walls, seeming to come from somewhere else entirely. A bullet crack might be swallowed by the open space of a factory hall. This acoustic confusion becomes part of your camouflage. You are not just hiding your body, you are hiding your noise. Your heat, your presence in every sense. Historians still debate how much the urban environment truly favored snipers compared to open terrain. Some argue that cities gave too many hiding places, too many angles, making it easier for a patient shooter to dominate an area. Others point out that the same complexity made it easier for enemies to approach unseen. To use underground routes, cellars, and sewers to flank and surprise. From your position high in the rubble, both truths feel uncomfortably real. You watch a street intersection for a long time. Nothing moves except a scrap of paper tumbling slowly in the wind. Then, far below, a door opens a crack. A sliver of darkness becomes a slightly wider sliver of darkness. Someone is listening, just as you are. You track the opening, but you don't fire. Not yet. The angle is poor. The risk of revealing your position is too high. Patience, again, is the currency. Your muscles protest the awkward position. One knee is pressed against concrete. The other folded under you in a way that will definitely complain later. Your back is hunched to fit the space, and your neck is craned just enough to bring the scope to your eye. It's not a posture any doctor would recommend, and you imagine a future where someone tells you, yes, your spine remembers the war. You almost laugh at the thought. A silent, internal chuckle at the idea of filling out a medical form that says, cause of chronic pain, hiding in a chimney for several hours. A soft memory surfaces of being told, during training, that the best urban positions are those that look unusable. Places no one would choose for comfort or convenience. A pile of twisted metal. A half-collapsed ceiling. A narrow ledge that forces you to balance rather than relax. The logic is simple. The more miserable the spot, the less likely someone else has already thought of it. You shift, imperceptibly, using a distant explosion as cover to ease pressure from your leg. The building shudders slightly, dust drifting down in a thin curtain. You freeze again, letting it settle, listening for any reaction. None comes. The city absorbs the movement, just as it has absorbed so much else. A well-known historical practice was the use of multiple hides, with snipers preparing several positions in advance and rotating between them after firing. To avoid counter-sniper retaliation, what's less often mentioned is how physically demanding this was in urban terrain. Moving from one hide to another meant climbing, crawling, and squeezing through wreckage, often under observation, always under the threat of being seen or heard. It wasn't a smooth relocation, it was an obstacle course built from destruction. You picture yourself later, slipping from this perch to another, lowering yourself through a hole in the floor, landing silently in a dark room below. The floor is littered with glass and plaster. You place each step with care, testing before committing weight. Somewhere, water drips, a slow, rhythmic sound that makes it hard to tell if someone else is moving. Your senses are stretched thin, tuned to the smallest irregularity. Another small, tired joke flits through your mind. This is like parkour, but with much worse consequences for a bad landing. The thought fades, but it lightens the heaviness for a second, like a brief stretch after holding a tense pose. From your high vantage point, the city looks almost peaceful. Snow softens edges, smoke drifts lazily. The geometry of ruins takes on a strange, abstract beauty. It's easy, in such moments, to forget that every wall and beam is the result of violence. That every convenient shadow might hide someone who is just as cold, just as tired, and just as alert as you are. You bring your focus back to the scope. The door below opens a little wider. A figure leans out, cautious, scanning. You and your spotter exchange a signal. Distance, wind, angle. The familiar quiet preparation begins again. And as you wait for the right second, balanced in an uncomfortable, precarious place high above the street, you understand one more reason why this role can become something you regret. Urban hiding places give you power and perspective, but they also trap you in positions that strain the body and the nerves. They demand that you twist yourself to fit the ruins, that you become part of the broken architecture. You are no longer just hiding in the city. You are, in a small, temporary way, becoming one of its damaged, silent structures, perched, tense, and waiting, hoping that the next movement you see will not be the one that finally reveals where you are. Time begins to behave strangely when your world is reduced to a narrow field of view and a steady, controlled breath. Hours can pass with almost nothing happening, and yet each second feels dense, packed with awareness. Your mind hovers in a state that is neither fully alert nor truly relaxed. A stretched, quiet tension that hums like a low electrical current. This is where the psychological strain really starts to show. A well-known historical fact is that snipers on the Eastern Front often spent far more time waiting than shooting. Days could pass with only brief, scattered moments of action, What's less commonly discussed is how this prolonged stillness affected concentration and emotion. The brain is not designed to remain in a constant state of readiness without release. It starts to blur the edges between important and unimportant signals, between imagination and reality. You notice it in small ways at first. A shadow shifts, and your pulse jumps, only to settle again when you realize it was just drifting smoke. A sound echoes, and for a moment you can't tell if it came from outside or from your own movement. Your senses feel sharpened, but also oddly unreliable, like a camera turned up to maximum sensitivity, picking up every speck of dust along with the subject. You blink and the image in your scope seems to swim for a second. Fatigue does that. It makes the world feel slightly out of sync, as if the frame rate of reality has dropped. You force your focus back, steadying the crosshairs, reminding yourself that what you see must be verified, not assumed. Training tells you to trust your senses. Experience tells you to question them. A lesser-known detail from wartime medical observations is how often snipers reported visual and auditory distortions after long periods of vigilance. Nothing dramatic enough to be called hallucinations, but subtle enough to be unsettling, mistaking debris for movement, hearing a distant sound as closer than it was, feeling as if time had stretched or compressed. Historians still debate whether these were early signs of combat stress or simply the natural effects of exhaustion and monotony layered over fear. You feel the monotony now, pressing in from all sides. Not boredom exactly, but a kind of mental flatness, as if your thoughts are being smoothed out by repetition. Watch, breathe, scan, wait. The pattern loops, over and over, until it feels like the only rhythm left in the world. And then, unexpectedly, memory slips in. You find yourself thinking about something ordinary from before the war. The sound of footsteps on a wooden floor. The smell of warm bread. The way sunlight used to fall across a familiar room. The images arrive uninvited, soft and almost comforting. For a moment, they pull you away from the cold and the rubble and the scope. You gently push them aside. Daydreaming is dangerous. Let your attention drift too far, and you might miss the one movement that matters. Still, the mind keeps offering these fragments, as if trying to remind itself that another life exists, or once did. A faint, inward joke surfaces. Your brain has decided this is the perfect time for a nostalgia playlist. Unfortunately, there's no skip button, and the volume has to stay low. You almost smile, then catch yourself and let your face remain still. The strain also shows in how your emotions flatten. The first confirmed shot brought a surge of feeling. A brief, intense awareness. Now, in the long stretches that follow, everything seems muted. You're not sad. You're not particularly afraid. You're simply focused, narrowed. It's as if your inner world has been trimmed down to the essentials needed for this job, and everything else has been set aside for later. Historians still argue about whether this emotional narrowing was a protective mechanism or a harmful one. Some suggest it allowed snipers to function under extreme conditions, keeping them from being overwhelmed by fear or doubt. Others point out that what is set aside does not disappear, it waits, and sometimes returns when the noise and urgency are gone. Your spotter whispers a brief update, nothing new. No movement. The sound of his voice is reassuring, but it also reminds you that communication itself takes effort. That even speaking a few words requires a careful balance between staying informed and staying hidden. You shift your attention back through the scope. The street remains quiet. Snow continues to fall in slow, drifting patterns. A piece of cloth flutters weakly from a broken window. Its movement repetitive and hypnotic. You watch it for a moment, then deliberately look away, not wanting your eyes to lock onto a single, meaningless motion. The waiting stretches on. Your body is still, but your mind is working constantly. Filtering, judging, comparing. Is that shadow new, or was it always there? Did the light just change, or did something pass in front of it? You replay small details, trying to build a consistent picture of the environment, a mental map that will alert you when something no longer fits. It's tiring in a way that running or lifting never is. There is no clear moment of exertion, no obvious signal to rest, just a continuous, low-level effort that quietly drains you. Modern people might recognize a version of this in long hours of intense concentration. Staring at screens, monitoring data, waiting for anomalies. The difference here is that the alert you're waiting for could be a human being stepping into view. And your response has consequences that can't be undone. A well-known historical observation is that some snipers became intensely attached to routine as a way to manage this strain. The same sequence of actions, the same order of checks, the same breathing patterns. Routine creates a sense of control in an environment where so much is uncertain. What's less often mentioned is how rigid that routine could become. How unsettling it felt when something disrupted it. You notice your own small rituals, counting breaths in sets of 4. Scanning sectors in the same order. Checking the same reference points again and again. It's comforting, in a way, like following a familiar path in the dark. It gives your mind something stable to hold on to. Another memory intrudes. Softer this time, the sound of laughter. Maybe from training days before the front. Or from home. It feels distant, almost like it belongs to someone else. You acknowledge it, then let it fade, returning to the present. Historians still debate how long a person can maintain this level of vigilance before something begins to give attention. Emotional balance. Or physical health, there is no simple answer. Only accounts that vary from individual to individual. Some seem to adapt, finding a grim rhythm. Others accumulated stress in ways that were not immediately visible, only emerging later in exhaustion, irritability, or a deep weariness that sleep alone could not fix. You feel a hint of that weariness now. A subtle heaviness behind the eyes. A slight slowing of thought that you have to consciously counter. You straighten, just a fraction, using a distant rumble of artillery to mask the movement. You blink deliberately, refocusing, letting the world sharpen again. The scope clears, the crosshairs steady, the street remains empty. The strain does not announce itself with drama. It doesn't shout or demand. It simply sits with you. Quietly, patiently, as constant as the cold. It asks you, again and again, to keep watching, to keep waiting, to keep your mind balanced on a narrow edge between alertness and exhaustion. And as you continue to lie there, wrapped in stillness and silence, you begin to understand that this invisible pressure, the psychological weight of endless vigilance, of narrowed focus, of time stretched thin, is as much a part of being a Soviet sniper as the rifle in your hands. It is a companion that never quite leaves. And one more reason why. Long after the echoes of shots fade, the experience itself may linger in ways you never expected. At some point, you realize that your work is no longer just a private struggle between you, the cold, and the narrow world in your scope. It has begun to acquire an audience. Not one you can see or hear, but one that exists far behind the lines. In warm rooms and crowded halls, where words and images travel faster than bullets. Your successes, and those of snipers like you, are being gathered, shaped, and retold. A well-known historical fact is that the Soviet Union made extensive use of sniper achievements for propaganda. Newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts celebrated high kill counts, heroic duels, and individual marksmen who symbolized resistance and skill. Names like Vasily Zaitsev became known far beyond the ruins where they had actually fought. The sniper was turned into a figure of inspiration, proof that a single, determined soldier could stand against the enemy. What's less often talked about is how strange this must have felt to the people doing the actual waiting and freezing and watching. One day, you are just another pair of eyes behind a scope, counting breaths and shadows. The next, your name might be printed somewhere, your actions summarized in bold lines, your experience condensed into something clean and triumphant. You imagine a reporter writing about a deadly marksman, describing courage, precision, and calm under fire. The words would glide over the hours of numb fingers, the crawling rats, the aching muscles, the long stretches of doubt and silence. They would not mention how your heart races before a shot, or how the memory of a falling figure can linger long after the moment itself has passed. A lesser-known detail from wartime records is that some snipers were encouraged to give interviews, pose for photographs, even visit training schools to demonstrate techniques. They became symbols as much as soldiers, living proof of an idea the state wanted to project: resilience, superiority, inevitability. Historians still debate how much this attention boosted morale and how much it placed an additional, quieter pressure on the individuals involved. You think about what it would be like to know that others are counting on your performance. Not just tactically, but emotionally. That somewhere, people who have never seen a ruined street or felt this cold are drawing comfort from the idea that you are out here. Steady and effective. It's a heavy, invisible weight, layered on top of the physical one. A faint, inward smile touches your thoughts. It's odd to be both invisible and, in a distant way, famous at the same time, hidden in rubble, yet perhaps discussed in a classroom or a factory break room. The contrast is almost absurd. Like being the subject of a documentary while actively trying not to be noticed by anyone at all. Your spotter murmurs something about a paper he once saw. A story about a sniper who supposedly held an entire street alone for days. You both know how these stories grow. A single engagement becomes a duel. A careful repositioning becomes a dramatic escape. Reality is compressed, simplified, polished. Historians still argue about where the line lies between accurate reporting and myth-making. Some sniper accounts were carefully verified, others were clearly embellished for effect. Numbers were sometimes rounded up, timelines smoothed, uncertainties removed. The messy, ambiguous parts of experience, the waiting, the fear, the near misses, do not fit easily into heroic narratives. You return your eye to the scope and think how little of this moment would translate into a poster or a headline. The quiet, the snow, the slow, controlled breathing, the absence of action, yet this is what most of your life here actually consists of. Another small, tired joke surfaces. If this were a movie, they would have cut this part entirely and jumped straight to the dramatic shot. Unfortunately, you are living in the director's cut, where every long, silent minute is included. The idea that your actions might be turned into something symbolic is unsettling in its own way. Symbols are smooth and simple. Lives are not. Symbols do not shiver, or ache, or doubt. They do not lie awake at night replaying small details, wondering what they missed, or what might have happened if they had waited a second longer or moved a centimeter less. And yet, you also understand the need for such stories. In a war of this scale, where loss is constant and overwhelming, people need figures to look to. Moments that suggest skill and agency rather than sheer destruction. The sniper, patient and precise, becomes a reassuring image. The idea that careful human effort still matters amid the machinery of war. You hold that thought gently, the way you hold your breath before letting it out. There is a strange comfort in knowing that your endurance, however unseen here, might be giving someone else a sense of hope somewhere else. It doesn't make the cold go away. It doesn't make the waiting shorter. But it adds a thin layer of meaning over the experience. Like a blanket that is not very warm, but better than nothing. Historians still debate whether the fame and attention given to elite snipers ultimately helped or harmed them. Some thrived on the recognition and sense of purpose. Others found it isolating, a reminder that their most intense experiences had been transformed into stories for others to consume. Lying here, watching the same silent street, you feel how far removed those stories would be from this reality. From the way your fingers ache around the stock, from the way your eyes burn slightly from staring too long, from the way your mind balances between focus and fatigue. You are not a symbol in this moment. You are simply a person, breathing carefully, waiting for something to happen, hoping that when it does, you will be ready. And in that gap between who you are here and who you might be in someone else's retelling, you sense another subtle source of strain. The knowledge that your experience can be flattened, simplified, turned into a clean narrative, while you continue to live its rough, uneven truth. It is one more quiet weight added to the rifle. The cold, the waiting, a reminder that being a Soviet sniper is not only about surviving the enemy, but also about existing in the space between reality and the stories that will later be told about it. The quiet around you carries another layer of history, one that doesn't always make it into the loudest stories. You think of the women who share this world of scopes and shadows, lying just as still in the cold, breathing just as carefully, watching the same ruined streets through the same narrow tunnels of glass. A well-known historical fact is that the Soviet Union trained and deployed thousands of female snipers during World War II. Names like Lyudmila Pavlichenko became famous, her record spoken of with a mixture of pride and awe. Women served not as mascots or exceptions, but as fully trained combatants, often proving as skilled and patient as their male counterparts. In the ruins of cities and the forests along the front, gender mattered far less than steadiness, eyesight, and the ability to wait without moving for hours. What's less often mentioned is how these women had to navigate not only the enemy, but expectations and skepticism within their own ranks. Some arrived at the front to find surprise, even doubt, in the faces of fellow soldiers who had never imagined a woman in such a role. Training quickly erased most of that doubt. A rifle, after all, does not care who holds it, only how steadily it is held. You imagine one of them lying in a nearby building, her face streaked with soot and frost, her breath fogging the scope just as yours does. Her hands would ache the same way. Her eyes would burn from the same long hours of focus. The cold would not make exceptions. The waiting would not go easier on anyone. A lesser-known detail from personal accounts is how some female snipers had to modify equipment and uniforms that were designed with male bodies in mind. Oversized boots, loose jackets, rifle stocks that didn't quite fit their shoulder length, small inconveniences that became real problems when precision and stillness were everything. Adjustments were made with cloth, padding, and improvisation, the same practical creativity you see everywhere on this front. Your spotter once mentioned a story of a woman who learned to braid her hair tightly and tuck it under her cap in a specific way so it wouldn't create pressure points during long hours in one position. It sounds like a small thing, almost domestic, until you realize that a single strand slipping loose and tickling an ear could break concentration at the worst possible moment. Here, even hairstyles become tactical decisions. War, it turns out, is very thorough about involving itself in every detail of life. There is also the matter of how they were seen, and how they saw themselves. Propaganda sometimes portrayed female snipers as symbols of the nation's total commitment. Proof that everyone, regardless of gender, was part of the fight. Posters and articles spoke of bravery and resolve, of the daughters of the motherland, watching over the front. It was stirring, and it was real in its own way. What it often left out were the quieter struggles, the isolation of working in small, intense pairs, the same psychological strain of waiting and watching, the same memories that followed every confirmed shot. Historians still debate whether female snipers experienced this strain differently, or whether the differences were more in how their stories were later told and received. Some accounts suggest a strong sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Others hint at added pressure to prove oneself again and again. To be beyond reproach in skill and discipline. You picture the shared routines, checking rifles, whispering distances, timing breaths. The same small, tired jokes might pass between partners. The same dry humor about cold toes and stiff fingers. Perhaps someone once muttered that the war had a strange way of making everyone equal by making everyone uncomfortable. It's not exactly a comforting thought, but it has a certain logic. Another faint joke flickers through your mind. In a world where everyone is bundled in layers of dirty winter gear and smeared with soot, it must have been the ultimate equal opportunity uniform. Fashion, at least, did not survive the Eastern Front. The thought almost makes you smile. Then you remind yourself, again, that smiling moves muscles. You return your focus to the scope and think about how these women, like you, had to reconcile the precision of their work with the stories told about them. Heroic profiles, impressive numbers, dramatic photographs, these would travel far. The long hours of stillness, the cold, the internal negotiations with fear and doubt would remain mostly invisible. A well-known historical outcome is that many of these snipers continued to be remembered and honored long after the war. Their contributions recognized in medals and memoirs. What's less often discussed is how some struggled to return to ordinary life, carrying with them the same quiet memories and habits formed in ruins and forests. The discipline that once kept them alive did not always fade easily. Historians still argue about how much the presence of women in such roles influenced broader views on gender and military service in the Soviet Union. Some see it as a lasting shift, others as a temporary necessity shaped by the extremes of total war. From your hidden position, these debates feel distant. What feels immediate is the shared experience of cold, patience, and focus. The way those factors strip away many of the labels that seem so important in other contexts. As you lie there, breathing carefully, you sense that the scope of this conflict is larger than any single story. It contains countless variations of the same basic human effort: to endure, to concentrate, to survive another hour. Men and women, famous and unknown, all pressed into the same quiet struggle against time, weather, and the watching eyes of an unseen enemy. And in that understanding, the image of the sniper becomes a little less singular, a little less mythic, and a little more human. Just people, wrapped in winter and discipline, doing a job that demands stillness, patience, and a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself loudly. A reminder that regret, like endurance, does not belong to one group alone. It settles wherever the waiting and the cold and the memories are allowed to take root. Night stretches itself over the ruins like a heavy blanket, and with it comes a different kind of challenge. Darkness doesn't simply hide things, it distorts them. Shapes soften, edges blur, and distances become harder to judge. Your world through the scope is now a mosaic of grays and blacks, where every shadow might be a doorway, and every doorway might be nothing at all. A well-known historical fact is that much of the fighting on the Eastern Front, including sniper activity, continued through long winter nights. Illumination came from flares, fires, and the faint, unreliable glow of the moon reflecting off snow. Snipers had to learn to work in near darkness, adjusting their routines and their expectations, knowing that visibility would be limited but danger would not. What's less commonly mentioned is how exhausting the nights could be. Not just physically, but mentally. The human body is tuned to rest when the light fades. Here, you do the opposite. You stay awake, alert, and motionless, listening for the smallest change in a soundscape that never truly goes quiet. Wind sighs through broken walls. Loose shutters tap in irregular rhythms. Somewhere, water drips steadily, like a clock that has decided to count seconds far too loudly. You find yourself staring into the darkness, waiting for it to resolve into something meaningful. Your eyes strain, trying to pull detail from shadow the way someone might try to read a text message on a dim phone screen. It's tiring, and after a while, everything starts to look the same. A pile of rubble could be a crouching figure. A dark doorway could be just that, an empty doorway. You have to constantly remind yourself not to see what you expect to see. A lesser-known detail from sniper training manuals is how much emphasis was placed on sound during night operations. With vision reduced, hearing became the primary early warning system. The crunch of snow under a boot, the scrape of fabric against brick, The faint metallic click of a rifle part. These were the clues you learned to interpret. Historians still debate how reliable such auditory cues were in the chaos of battle, especially in urban environments where echoes and overlapping noises could be misleading. Your spotter leans close enough to whisper a warning about a distant movement. More felt than heard, you both freeze, letting the darkness settle. You count breaths. You listen. For a moment, it feels as if the entire city is holding still with you, suspended between one sound and the next. The cold seems sharper at night, as if it takes advantage of the darkness to creep closer. Your fingers feel stiff around the rifle, and you subtly flex them, careful not to shift your position. The metal is so cold it almost feels wet, though you know it's just the way numbness plays tricks on sensation. You think, briefly, that this would be a terrible time to drop anything, because finding it again in the dark would be like searching for a black glove on a black floor in a black room. The universe, you suspect, would find that very funny. Your mind, in its quieter moments, starts to wander. The lack of visual stimulation makes it easier for thoughts to drift, for memories to surface. You gently pull your focus back, like guiding a sleepy child to stay awake a little longer. There will be time to rest later. For now, the job is to watch and listen. A well-known historical reality is that night also offered opportunities. Movement was easier to conceal, and repositioning could be done with less risk of being seen. What's less often highlighted is how nerve-wracking that movement was. Every step in the dark carried the possibility of noise, of a misjudged distance, of bumping into something that would announce your presence. Historians still argue about whether the cover of darkness favored snipers or made their work more dangerous by increasing uncertainty. You and your spotter exchange a few whispered numbers, angles, distances, reference points barely visible in the gloom. The communication is slower now, more cautious. Words feel heavier in the night air, as if they might travel farther than you intend. A small, tired joke flickers through your thoughts. This is like trying to play a very serious game of hide and seek with the lights off and the rules written in a language no one fully understands. You suppress the urge to smile, remembering once again that even that tiny movement counts. The darkness deepens, and with it, the sense of isolation. The world seems reduced to what you can hear and the narrow patch of gray you can see. Everything else might as well not exist. It's in these long winter nights that the waiting feels longest. That time seems to stretch and thin like cold air. Historians still debate how soldiers coped with this inversion of normal rhythms, with being most alert when the body wanted to sleep and most still when the mind wanted to wander. Some adapted, developing routines and micro-rituals to stay focused. Others simply endured, counting hours and trusting that dawn would eventually return. You hold onto that thought now. Dawn will come, the sky will lighten, shadows will sharpen into shapes again. Until then, you remain here, listening to the soft, endless conversation of wind and ruins, letting the darkness pass over you without quite swallowing you whole. In these long winter nights, you learn another quiet lesson of the sniper's life. That endurance is not only about withstanding cold or fear, but about staying present in a world where sight fades. Time stretches, and the smallest sound can suddenly mean everything. Hunger arrives quietly, the way the cold did at first. as a background sensation you think you can ignore. It's not the dramatic, hollow ache that makes you double over. It's subtler than that, a low, persistent reminder that your body is burning fuel even while you lie perfectly still. That concentration itself has a cost. A well-known historical fact is that soldiers on the Eastern Front often survived on limited and irregular rations, especially during intense battles and long winters. Supply lines were stretched, disrupted by weather, by enemy action, by the sheer scale of the fighting. Bread, porridge, a bit of fat or meat when available, enough to keep you going, but rarely enough to make you forget about food. What's less commonly mentioned is how difficult it was for snipers to eat while on position. You can't just unwrap a meal and dig in. The rustle of paper, the smell of food, the movement of your hands, each of these is a tiny risk. So you learn to eat in fragments. A small bite during a lull. A sip from a canteen when the wind is loud enough to cover the sound. You learn to chew slowly, carefully, making sure nothing crunches. You remember being issued a piece of dark bread earlier. Dense and heavy, the kind that feels like it could survive a fall from a building. You've tucked it into a pocket, close to your body so it won't freeze completely solid. When you finally bring it to your mouth, breaking off a small piece, it tastes faintly sour and wonderfully real. It's not a feast. It's not even particularly good. But it's warm from your body heat. And right now, that makes it feel almost luxurious. A lesser-known detail from soldiers' letters is how often they wrote about the smell of food as much as the taste. The faint scent of bread, of soup, of anything cooked could momentarily overpower the smells of smoke and dust, pulling their thoughts back to kitchens and tables far from the front. Historians still debate how much such sensory memories helped maintain morale, offering brief mental escapes from the environment of war. You take another careful bite and then stop, resisting the urge to finish it all at once. Rationing becomes second nature, not just because supplies are limited, but because you don't know when the next quiet moment will come. The bread is both food and future, a small reserve against the hours still ahead. Your stomach settles slightly, but the hunger doesn't disappear. It lingers, a dull companion, like the cold and the waiting. It sharpens your senses in some ways, making you more aware of every smell carried by the wind. You catch the faint, imagined aroma of something cooking somewhere. And for a second your mind tries to build a picture around it, a pot. Steam rising, hands moving, you gently pull yourself back to the present, to the rubble and the snow. A faint, dry humor surfaces. You are lying in a ruined city, performing one of the most specialized tasks in the army. And your biggest fantasy at the moment is a decent meal. Not glory, not medals, just something warm and filling. The thought makes you almost smile. Then you remember, once again, to keep your face still. Water is its own challenge. Your canteen is tucked close, but the liquid inside is cold enough to sting your throat when you swallow. You take a small sip, careful not to cough. The cold water spreads through your chest. A brief, sharp contrast to the warmth of the bread. You imagine how good hot tea would be, how its steam would feel on your face, and you decide not to think about that too much. A well-known historical reality is that malnutrition and dehydration affected soldiers' endurance and concentration. What's less often discussed is how people learn to manage these limitations mentally. You don't dwell on how hungry you are. You acknowledge it, file it away, and focus on the next immediate task: watch, listen, breathe. Historians still argue about how much the quality and quantity of rations influenced sniper effectiveness compared to factors like training and terrain. Some suggest that even small deficits in energy could accumulate, subtly degrading reaction time and focus. Lying here, feeling the slow burn of hunger beneath your careful calm, you can believe it. The mind may be disciplined, but it still lives in a body that needs fuel. You finish the small piece of bread and tuck the rest away. The act feels almost ceremonial, like closing a book you'll return to later. For now, it's enough, not satisfying, but sufficient. The scope comes back into focus. The street remains quiet. Snow continues its soft descent. Your stomach murmurs once, then settles again, as if it understands the rules of this place. There will be no indulgence, only maintenance. And in that quiet negotiation between need and necessity, you sense another layer of what makes this life something you might one day regret. Not the absence of food entirely, but the constant calculation, the way even something as simple and human as eating becomes another operation to plan, another movement to minimize, another desire to postpone. Here, survival is measured in patience, in restraint, in the ability to tell your own body, gently but firmly, to wait just a little longer. The weather, you learn, is not just a background condition here. It is an active participant, as unpredictable and as influential as any unit on the map. Wind, snow, fog, sudden thaws followed by hard freezes. Each one reshapes the battlefield in quiet, decisive ways, and each one reaches into your small, careful world behind the scope. A well-known historical fact is that the Eastern Front was defined by extreme weather. Brutal winters with deep snow and sub-zero temperatures were followed by periods of thaw that turned roads and fields into thick mud. These conditions affected everything: movement, supply, weapon function, and the physical limits of the soldiers themselves. For snipers, whose effectiveness depended on stability and visibility, the weather could be an ally one moment and an enemy the next. Right now, the wind has picked up slightly. It slides through the ruins in low, restless currents, finding every gap in brick and board. You feel it on your face. A cold, dry touch that carries the faint smell of smoke and distant fires. Through the scope, you see how it stirs loose snow from ledges, sending fine, glittering curtains drifting across your field of view. It's beautiful, in a stark, minimal way. It's also a problem. You have to account for it. Even a light crosswind can push a bullet just enough to matter at long range. Your spotter whispers a correction, and you make the smallest adjustment, barely perceptible, shifting the crosshairs a fraction of a mark. It's a strange kind of cooperation with nature. You can't stop the wind, so you learn to negotiate with it. Fog is another kind of challenge. When it rolls in, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply softens the edges of the world, blurring distance and flattening depth. A building that looked clear and distinct a moment ago becomes a vague, gray shape. Windows dissolve into darker smudges. Movement is harder to detect, but so are details. It's like trying to read fine print through frosted glass. A lesser-known detail from sniper accounts is how much they relied on subtle changes in color and contrast during foggy conditions. The human eye, when deprived of sharp outlines, becomes more sensitive to tiny shifts in tone. A darker patch against a slightly lighter background. A shape that interrupts the uniform gray. These become the clues you train yourself to notice. Historians still debate how effective snipers truly were in heavy fog, but there is no doubt that many continued to operate, adjusting their expectations and their patience. Snow, of course, is the most constant companion. It muffles sound, softens movement, and provides excellent camouflage. It also reflects light in a way that can be both helpful and dangerous. Moonlight on snow can make a landscape surprisingly bright, turning shadows into sharp, black shapes. At the same time, the smallest disturbance, a footprint, a scuffed patch, a place where the white has been scraped away, stands out clearly. Like a mark on clean paper. You watch a stretch of open ground where the snow lies smooth and unbroken. It feels almost intimate, as if the surface is holding its breath, waiting to be disturbed. A single set of tracks would tell a story here. Direction, pace, hesitation. You've been taught to read these signs the way a tracker reads a forest path. Noting where someone slowed, where they might have crouched, where they changed course. Cold affects more than your body. It affects your equipment. Metal contracts. Lubricants thicken. The bolt of your rifle moves less smoothly than it would in warmer air. And you've learned to work it with firm, deliberate pressure rather than quick, casual motions. A well-known historical issue on the Eastern Front was weapon malfunction due to extreme cold. What's less often mentioned is how soldiers adapted by altering maintenance routines. Using different oils, sometimes even warming parts of their rifles against their bodies before action. You are careful now to keep the rifle as close as possible, sharing what little warmth you can spare. It's an odd, almost tender gesture, as if you are trying to keep a living thing comfortable. In a way, it is. The rifle is your voice, your reach, your protection. If it stiffens too much, if it hesitates when it should move, the consequences could be immediate. The weather also plays tricks on sound. Wind can carry a noise farther than expected, or scatter it so that direction becomes hard to judge. Snow can muffle a step until it's almost silent, then suddenly crunch loudly when a crust forms on the surface. You listen carefully, trying to build a three-dimensional picture of the environment from these shifting acoustic clues. A small, tired thought drifts through your mind. The weather seems to be constantly changing the rules of the game. Just when you think you've learned them, one moment it offers concealment. The next it demands compensation and caution. It's like playing chess on a board that occasionally tilts, just enough to make the pieces slide. Historians still debate how decisive weather truly was in individual sniper engagements, as opposed to its broader strategic impact. Some argue that skill and positioning always outweighed environmental factors. Others point out that in marginal situations, a sudden gust, a veil of fog, or a glare of reflected light could tip the balance. From where you lie, the argument feels less theoretical. You feel the wind on your skin, the cold in your fingers, the way visibility ebbs and flows. It all feeds directly into your calculations, your timing, your decisions. A light snowfall begins again, flakes drifting down in slow, unhurried spirals. They settle on your camouflage, on the rubble, on the edges of your scope. You gently brush a few away from the lens, using a moment when a distant gun rumbles to mask the movement. The world becomes quieter, softer, as if wrapped in layers of cotton. There's a strange comfort in that softness, even as you know it's temporary. It makes the ruins look less jagged, the shadows less harsh. For a second, you can almost imagine that the city is simply sleeping, not shattered. The illusion fades quickly, but the calm it brings lingers for a heartbeat or two. Another faint, internal joke appears. You've always heard people complain about the weather, but you've never known anyone to take it this personally. Here, every shift in temperature or wind direction feels like a direct message. A note slipped under the door of your awareness that says, adjust, adapt, pay attention. You do. You adjust your grip. You settle your shoulders. You let your breathing find its slow, even rhythm again. The crosshairs rest where you want them. The environment, in all its shifting moods, becomes part of your extended senses. Something you read and interpret alongside distance and movement. In this way, the weather becomes another opponent and another partner at the same time. It challenges you, distracts you, sometimes protects you, sometimes exposes you. It never stops reminding you that, despite all your training and patience, you are still a small, warm creature lying in a vast, cold world that moves to its own rhythms. And as you lie there, feeling the wind, watching the snow, listening to the quiet change of air through broken walls, you understand another reason why this role can become something you regret. You are not only pitted against other people with rifles, you are also in constant negotiation with the elements themselves, asking your body and your focus to hold steady while the world around you shifts and reshapes. Indifferent to your comfort, and utterly unconcerned with how long you can endure, stories begin to circulate the way smoke does, seeping through cracks, drifting from one group to another, changing shape as they go. In the half-light of dawn or the long hush before night, you hear whispers about extraordinary shots, about impossible patience, about duels that lasted days and ended with a single, decisive moment. The ruins become a kind of echo chamber for legend. A well-known historical fact is that the Eastern Front produced some of the most famous sniper stories of the war, especially those associated with urban fighting. Tales of two marksmen locked in silent competition, each trying to outweight and outthink the other, were shared in units and later printed in newspapers and memoirs. These stories helped build the image of the sniper as a solitary hunter, a figure of almost mythic calm and precision. What's less often mentioned is how quickly these stories could grow beyond their original shape. A brief exchange of shots might become a prolonged duel. A careful relocation might be remembered as a daring escape. Names would attach themselves to events, sometimes accurately, sometimes because a good story needs a recognizable hero. In the quiet hours, you and your spotter trade these accounts the way people everywhere trade rumors. Half for information, half for distraction. You listen to one such tale now, about a sniper who supposedly waited 3 days in the same position, never moving, until his opponent finally revealed himself. The story is delivered in a low voice, almost reverent. You picture the scene, the stillness, the cold, The absolute commitment to not shifting an inch. It sounds impressive. It also sounds extremely uncomfortable. You think, with a faint inward smile, that anyone who volunteers for a 3-day staring contest in winter should probably get a medal just for stubbornness. A lesser-known detail from veterans' accounts is that many of these duels were later reconstructed from fragments of memory, from unit reports, and from post-war interviews. The exact sequence of events was not always clear, and the fog of war, literal and figurative, filled in the gaps. Historians still debate how many of the most famous sniper confrontations unfolded exactly as later described, and how many were shaped by the natural human tendency to find clear narratives in complex, chaotic situations. You don't doubt that extraordinary patience and skill existed. You see glimpses of it every day in the way people around you move, wait, and watch. But you also know how much of this life is made of uncertainty, of moments that don't resolve cleanly, of targets that never quite appear, of decisions that are revisited endlessly in your own mind. The legend smooths those rough edges. Another story floats past. This one about a sniper who supposedly used a piece of broken mirror to lure an enemy into revealing their position. Clever, dramatic, and entirely plausible in principle. You imagine the setup, the careful placement, the tension of waiting for a reaction. Then you imagine the mirror slipping, or catching the wrong angle of light, or simply being ignored. Reality, you've learned, is full of such anticlimactic possibilities. A small, dry joke forms in your thoughts. Legends always seem to skip the part where nothing happens for hours and your leg falls asleep. It's probably not as catchy for a headline. You almost chuckle. Then remember the rules about movement and stillness, and keep the humor strictly internal. These stories serve a purpose. They give shape to experience, turn long stretches of waiting into something that feels meaningful, even epic. They also offer a kind of mental company. When you are lying alone with your thoughts, it can be oddly comforting to know that others have done this before. That they too stared into shadow and cold and came out with tales that people still repeat. A well-known historical effect of such legends was their use in training and morale building. New snipers were told these stories as examples of what could be achieved, as proof that patience and discipline could overcome fear and fatigue. What's less often discussed is how these same stories might set unrealistic expectations, making ordinary, necessary caution feel like inadequacy by comparison. You feel that tension now. The quiet question of whether you are living up to some invisible standard set by names and numbers and dramatic retellings. You remind yourself that your job is not to become a story. It is to do what you are doing now: watch, wait, communicate, survive. Historians still argue about how much the myth of the sniper influenced behavior on the battlefield. Some suggest it encouraged greater care and patience. Others think it may have added pressure, pushing individuals to take risks in order to match the exploits they had heard about. From your hidden position, the debate feels distant but relevant. You can feel the pull of narrative even as you try to stay grounded in the unglamorous details of the present. The ruins around you remain silent, indifferent to legend. Brick does not care about fame. Snow does not preserve heroic poses. It simply covers whatever is beneath it. The wind moves through shattered windows with the same sound. whether it is carrying a famous name or an unknown one. You bring your focus back to the scope, letting the stories fade into the background. They are interesting, sometimes inspiring, sometimes unsettling, but they are not the task at hand. The task is the same as it has always been: to be still, to be observant, to make careful decisions when the moment demands. Another tiny, tired thought surfaces. If someone were to tell the story of this exact moment, it would be very short. He waited, that's it. No dramatic music, no climactic reveal, just waiting. You find that strangely appropriate. In this way, the legends of sniper duels hover at the edge of your awareness, adding color and context, but also highlighting the gap between story and lived experience. They remind you that what will later be remembered as sharp, decisive moments are, in reality, embedded in long, quiet stretches of uncertainty and strain. And as you lie there, listening to the soft hiss of wind over snow, you understand that the true test of this role is not whether you will become part of a legend. It is whether you can continue to exist in the spaces between legends, the hours of stillness, the unresolved questions, the patient, uncelebrated endurance that makes any dramatic moment possible at all. The change comes suddenly, the way so many things do in this war, not with a clear warning, but with a sharp interruption to the steady rhythm you've learned to live inside. A distant crack echoes, closer than the others, and a moment later you feel a fierce, hot sting in your arm, as if someone has snapped a frozen rubber band against your skin with surprising enthusiasm. You don't immediately register it as a wound. At first, it's just a shock, a jolt that breaks through the cocoon of cold and stillness. Then warmth spreads beneath your sleeve, an unfamiliar sensation in a world that has been defined by numbness. Your spotter is at your side in an instant, whispering urgently, pulling you down just enough to break the line of sight. A well-known historical fact is that snipers, despite their careful concealment, were far from immune to being hit. Counter-sniper fire, artillery fragments, and stray bullets claimed many. And even a small wound could be serious in the cold, where blood loss and infection were constant threats. Evacuation under fire was often slow and dangerous, especially in ruined urban terrain. What's less commonly mentioned is how many wounds were relatively minor in a medical sense but deeply disruptive to a sniper's work. A bullet graze, a piece of shrapnel lodged in muscle, severe frostbite. Injuries that might not be fatal could still end weeks or months of careful, specialized training. A hand that trembled slightly, a shoulder that no longer held the rifle quite as steadily, an eye that took longer to focus, small changes with large consequences. Your spotter presses a bandage against your arm, his movements quick but controlled. The pain is sharp now, cutting through the fog of cold, and you focus on your breathing the way you always do. Letting it slow, letting the world narrow again. You are guided back, inch by inch, using the ruins as cover, moving only when the wind or distant explosions can mask the sound. A faint, almost absurd thought crosses your mind. This is a terrible time to discover that your body has a very strong opinion about being perforated. You would laugh if it wouldn't hurt. And if laughing wouldn't be a bad idea in general right now. You are eventually handed over to medics in a cellar-turned-aid station. The air thick with the smell of antiseptic and damp stone. A lamp casts a yellow circle of light over rough wooden tables. Other wounded men lie nearby. Some quiet, some murmuring. The war, which had been reduced to a narrow street and a scope, suddenly expands again into a room full of human sound and movement. A lesser-known detail from medical reports is how often snipers resisted being taken off the line for what seemed like small injuries. The sense of responsibility to their partner and their position was strong, and some tried to return before they were fully healed. Historians still debate how much this eagerness to go back affected long-term health, and how often it led to complications that could have been avoided with longer rest. As a bandage is tightened around your arm, you feel the familiar mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the wound is not worse. Frustration that you are, for now, out of the careful routine you've built, separated from the spotter who has become your other set of eyes. It's like being taken out of a long, intense project halfway through, not because it's finished, but because your body has decided to file a very firm complaint. Someone nearby makes a soft joke about how the war has a way of reminding you that you are, in fact, made of parts, and that those parts can malfunction. It earns a few tired smiles. Humor, even here, finds a way to sneak in, like a small, stubborn weed pushing through cracked concrete. You think about what it means to return after being wounded. Not just physically, but mentally. The position you left behind, the shadows you knew so well, will look the same. You will not. The memory of the impact, the sudden pain, the awareness of how quickly stillness can be broken, these will come with you. They will sit quietly in the background the next time you lie down with a rifle, like a new note added to the constant hum of vigilance. A well-known historical pattern is that many soldiers who were wounded and then returned to duty reported heightened caution, sometimes bordering on hyper-awareness. What's less often discussed is how this could be both an asset and a burden, sharper senses. Yes, but also a mind that replays moments, that anticipates danger in every small sound. Historians still debate how repeated exposure to injury and recovery shaped the long-term psychology of frontline specialists like snipers. Some see resilience, an ability to adapt and continue. Others see the accumulation of quiet stress, a layering of memories that never fully settles. As you lie on the narrow cot, the pain in your arm now a steady, manageable throb, you listen to the muted sounds of the city above, the wind, the distant rumble, the same world, continuing without you for the moment. You think of your spotter, back in the ruins, watching and waiting, and you feel a tug of impatience to be there too, to return to the familiar, disciplined stillness. Another small, weary joke surfaces. Apparently, your body has decided to take a very unscheduled vacation. Unfortunately, it did not consult you about the timing. The lamp flickers. The medic moves on to the next patient. You are left with your thoughts, the bandage, and the sense that this pause, however brief, is a reminder of something you have been trying not to dwell on, that no amount of training or patience makes you immune to chance. Being wounded, even slightly, breaks the illusion of control. It shows you how thin the line is between lying unseen and being suddenly, painfully present, and as you close your eyes for a moment, letting the room's quiet hum replace the distant crack of rifles, you understand that returning to the scope will carry a new weight. Not just the memory of cold and waiting, but the knowledge that the world can reach out and touch you. Without warning, through brick and shadow and all the careful stillness you can manage. When you return to the line, the first thing you notice is not the cold or the ruins. It's the absence. The spot where your partner used to lie is occupied by someone new. A figure you don't yet know by the rhythm of their breathing or the tiny, habitual movements that signal thought. He settles in carefully, trying not to disturb the snow and dust, whispering his name, checking angles the way he was trained to. Everything is correct, everything is professional, and yet, the space feels different, like a room where the furniture has been rearranged just enough to make you reach for things that are no longer there. A well-known historical fact is that sniper teams on the Eastern Front were often reshuffled by necessity. Wounds, illness, death, or reassignment meant that spotters and shooters who had built deep, intuitive coordination were suddenly paired with strangers. The war did not pause for continuity. It simply filled gaps and moved on. What's less commonly discussed is how disorienting this could be. You had learned your previous partner's timing, how long he watched a sector before shifting, the way his voice dropped when he was certain about a distance, the slight pause that meant he was unsure and wanted a second look. Those patterns had become part of your own thinking. Now, they are gone, replaced by new ones you must learn from scratch. Under the same quiet pressure, you exchange the basic signals again. Taps, whispers, distances, wind calls. It all works, technically. But trust, you realize, is not only about competence. It's about familiarity built through shared stillness, shared cold, shared long hours where nothing happens and everything might. A lesser-known detail from unit diaries is how often soldiers wrote about the emotional jolt of losing a partner. Even when the loss was not fatal. A spotter transferred, a sniper sent to another sector. The bond, forged in silence and danger, was suddenly cut. Historians still debate how much these repeated disruptions affected performance and morale. But many accounts suggest a period of adjustment where confidence felt thinner, more tentative. Your new partner whispers about movement on a distant rooftop. You bring your scope around, align, wait for his second confirmation. It comes. The process is smooth, and yet, a small part of your mind compares it to how the previous spotter would have signaled. How his timing felt almost like a second heartbeat in your own chest. The comparison is automatic, and you gently push it aside. This is not a place for nostalgia. This is a place for focus. A quiet, dry thought flickers. It's strange how quickly someone can become essential. And how quickly the world can replace them. Like losing a favorite tool and being handed another that does the job just as well, but doesn't yet feel like it belongs in your hand. You watch the street together. The new spotter is careful, perhaps a little cautious, perhaps simply thorough. He double-checks distances. He whispers twice about the same shadow. You don't mind. Caution is a virtue here. Still, you feel the subtle tension of learning each other's habits in real time, with no margin for misunderstanding. A well-known historical reality is that many sniper pairs did, over time, develop strong bonds again, even after losses. The routine of watching and waiting, of trusting another person with your blind spots, has a way of drawing people together quickly. What's less often mentioned is the quiet grief that sometimes lingered beneath that process, the memory of a voice that used to be there. A set of signals that once felt perfectly in sync. Historians still argue about how much such losses and replacements affected the effectiveness of sniper teams. Some point to records showing that experienced shooters adapted quickly, their skill carrying over regardless of who lay beside them. Others note subtle drops in confidence and increased caution during transition periods. From your perspective, the difference is felt less in statistics and more in sensation. A slight tightening in the chest. A fraction more time taken before committing to a movement or a shot. The wind shifts. Snow drifts across the open ground. Your new partner murmurs a correction. And you adjust. The rhythm begins to form. Slowly, like a new song learning its own tempo. You find yourself listening not just to the environment, but to him, to the cadence of his breathing, the way he clears his throat before speaking, the pattern of his pauses. Another small, inward joke appears. You're basically speed running the getting to know you phase. Except the icebreakers are incoming fire and the trust exercises involve not getting either of you killed. It's not the usual way to make friends. But it is, apparently, very efficient. You think, briefly, of your former spotter. Where he is now, whether he is healing, or watching another street with another partner, or resting somewhere far from this cold. The thought is quiet, contained, like a folded note kept in a pocket. You don't unfold it now. You can't afford to. The new spotter whispers again. Movement, low, left, you follow. The coordination improves with each exchange. The tiny timing differences smoothing out. Trust, you realize, is not a single decision. It's a process, built moment by moment, breath by breath, through shared attention. Historians still debate how soldiers balanced the need to move forward with the human tendency to hold on to what was familiar. In a war of constant change, adaptation was essential, but so was acknowledging, at least internally, the weight of what had been lost or left behind. As you settle back into your position, the city silent around you. You feel both the presence of the new and the echo of the old. The job continues. The routines resume. The scope frames the same kinds of shadows. And in that quiet continuity, you sense another layer of what makes this life so heavy. Not just the cold, or the waiting, or the danger, but the way relationships are formed and broken by circumstance. The way trust must be rebuilt again and again, even as memories of previous partnerships linger like faint outlines in the snow. With time, you begin to notice that the war itself seems to be learning. Not in a human way, of course, but in patterns. The places that were once safe become dangerous. The methods that once worked draw attention. The quiet tricks you and others relied on slowly lose their surprise. Both sides watch, adapt, and adjust, and the invisible contest between patience and perception grows more refined. A well-known historical fact is that as the Eastern Front dragged on, sniper tactics evolved on both sides. Early successes led to countermeasures. Better camouflage, more disciplined movement, coordinated counter-sniper teams, and the use of decoys and feints. What began as individual skill gradually became a more systematic, almost scientific exchange of methods and responses. You feel this evolution in small, practical ways. Windows that once seemed perfect for observation are now watched carefully by both sides. Rubble piles that offered excellent concealment have been studied, memorized, and sometimes pre-sighted by enemy rifles. The city, once a maze of unknowns, is slowly turning into a map of likely angles and expected positions. Your new spotter whispers about a helmet on a stick, raised slowly above a low wall. A decoy. You've seen it before, or at least heard about it. A well-known historical practice was to use such simple tools to draw a shot. Reveal a position, and then answer it with artillery or a waiting rifle. What's less often mentioned is how many times nothing happened at all. How often the decoys simply stood there, wobbling slightly in the wind, testing nerves and patience. You don't fire. You watch. You let the moment stretch. The helmet remains, motionless, an empty question mark against the pale sky. Somewhere, someone is watching it too, waiting to see who will blink first. After a long while, it lowers again, the test inconclusive. The silence resumes. Your spotter murmurs approval. Patience, again, proves more valuable than speed. Historians still debate how much these evolving tactics reduced the effectiveness of individual snipers over time. Some argue that as both sides became more cautious and better informed, opportunities for clean, decisive shots diminished. Others point out that the constant adaptation kept the role dangerous and demanding. Simply in different ways. From where you lie, the distinction feels academic. What you experience is a steady tightening of the contest. A sense that every move is now anticipated. Every trick expected. You notice changes in your own habits too. You reposition more often. You avoid using the same hide twice in a row. You vary the times you scan certain sectors. The order in which you check windows and rooftops. Routine, once a comfort, now feels like a potential liability. Predictability is something the enemy can learn. A lesser-known detail from sniper training notes is how much emphasis began to be placed on irregularity, changing patterns deliberately. Introducing small, random variations in movement and timing to avoid becoming readable. It's a strange kind of discipline, learning to be methodically unpredictable. Historians still argue about how effective this was in practice. But the intent is clear. Survival favors those who refuse to become habits. You think, with faint, tired humor, that this is like trying to outsmart an opponent who is also trying very hard to be unpredictable. It's a game where both players are constantly changing the rules. And the only fixed point is the need to remain unseen. The environment participates in this evolution as well. New shell holes open up, creating fresh lines of sight and new dead zones. A collapsed wall that once blocked a view now offers a clear angle down a street. Smoke from a burning building creates a temporary curtain, then drifts away, revealing what it hid. You and your spotter take note, updating your mental map, filing away each change like a librarian cataloging a book that keeps rewriting itself. A well-known historical development was the increased use of coordinated infantry and sniper operations, with marksmen providing overwatch while small units moved, and infantry in turn helping protect and relocate snipers. What's less often highlighted is how this cooperation required even more communication and trust. And how a single breakdown in timing could expose everyone involved. The web of coordination grew more complex. And with complexity came new points of failure. You feel that complexity now in the way information flows. A whispered report from another team. A hand signal passed along a line of ruins. A brief pause while someone confirms a sighting. The battlefield is no longer just what you see through your scope, it's a network of observations, guesses, and shared caution. Another small, inward joke surfaces. You're part of the slowest, quietest group project imaginable, and the grading rubric is extremely unforgiving. The thought fades, but it leaves behind a thin thread of perspective. You are not alone in this adaptation. Everyone is learning, adjusting, trying to stay one step ahead of the other side's learning. Historians still debate whether this tactical evolution favored defense or offense in the long run. Some suggest it led to stalemates of patience, with both sides reluctant to expose themselves. Others argue that innovation, new optics, better communication, improved camouflage, eventually tipped the balance in specific areas. Lying here, you experience it as a continuous process rather than a clear outcome. A constant refinement of how to wait, how to watch, how to move when you finally do move. The new spotter shifts slightly and whispers a wind change. You adjust. The crosshairs settle. The street remains quiet. The decoy does not return. In these moments, you feel how the role of the sniper is being slowly reshaped by experience, by countermeasures, by the accumulated lessons of countless small encounters. What once felt like a solitary craft now feels like part of a broader, evolving system, one where individual skill still matters, but must constantly adapt to an opponent who is learning just as fast. And in that ongoing adaptation, you sense another reason why this life can weigh so heavily. There is no point at which you can say, "Now I know enough. Now I am safe." The environment changes. The enemy changes. Your own methods must change in response. The learning never really stops. And neither does the tension that comes with knowing that yesterday's solution might be tomorrow's mistake. So you keep watching, you keep adjusting, you let go of old certainties and build new ones, even as you know they may not last. In the quiet between breaths, you understand that surviving here is not just about mastering a skill, but about staying flexible in a world that is constantly, silently, trying to outgrow whatever advantage you think you have found. Fatigue does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, the way cold does, settling into joints and thoughts until you can no longer remember what it felt like to be fully warm, fully rested, fully alert. Sleep, when it comes, is short and shallow, broken by noise, by watch rotations, by the simple discomfort of trying to rest in rubble and frost. A well-known historical fact is that frontline soldiers on the Eastern Front often suffered from chronic sleep deprivation. Long shifts, constant alerts, and the need to remain ready at any hour meant that true, uninterrupted rest was rare. For snipers, whose effectiveness depended on sharp perception and steady nerves, this lack of sleep was especially punishing. What's less commonly mentioned is how sleep deprivation subtly alters perception. Colors seem duller. Depth is harder to judge. Thoughts move a fraction slower. As if wading through thick water, you catch yourself rereading the same patch of ground through the scope. Not because anything has changed, but because your mind briefly forgot that it had already checked it. Your new spotter whispers, and for a moment you don't quite process the words. You ask him to repeat. He does, softly, without irritation. You nod, adjust, and feel a small flicker of unease. Missing a word in conversation is one thing. Missing a detail in a battlefield is something else entirely. A lesser-known detail from wartime medical notes is how often exhaustion was linked to small, almost invisible errors. A delayed reaction, a misjudged distance, a forgotten step in a routine. Historians still debate how many close calls and losses were influenced by such subtle lapses, masked by the chaos of combat and never fully recorded. You fight the heaviness behind your eyes by returning to your rituals. Count breaths, scan in order, check reference points, repeat. The routine becomes a rail you hold on to, guiding your attention when your mind wants to drift. Another faint, inward joke surfaces. You're performing the most intense job imaginable on the least amount of sleep imaginable. It's like being asked to do delicate surgery after staying up all night. Except the operating room is a frozen ruin and the patient is the situation itself. You think about how sleep used to work. Closing your eyes and letting go. Trusting that nothing urgent would demand your attention for hours. That kind of surrender feels distant now. Almost luxurious. Here, even when you rest, part of you remains tuned to sound, to vibration, to any change in the air. A well-known historical practice was the rotation of sniper teams to rear areas for brief periods of recovery. What's less often discussed is how short these breaks sometimes were, and how quickly people were sent back when the situation demanded it. Historians still argue about whether such rotations were sufficient to restore sharpness, or whether they merely took the edge off a deeper, accumulating fatigue. You feel that accumulation now. Not dramatic exhaustion, not collapse, but a steady, persistent weariness. It makes patience harder. It makes the cold feel colder. It makes the waiting feel longer. You have to consciously slow yourself, to resist the urge to rush a scan or settle too quickly on an interpretation. The wind shifts, snow falls, your spotter murmurs another distance. You respond, almost automatically. The movement's practiced enough to survive the fog of tiredness. Still, you are aware of the effort it takes to keep everything precise. Historians still debate how much long-term fatigue shaped the psychological state of soldiers on the Eastern Front, especially those in specialized roles that demanded constant concentration. Some argue that people adapted, finding a new, lower baseline that still functioned. Others suggest that the cost was simply deferred, paid later in ways that were harder to measure. As you lie there, breathing slowly, you feel that cost building quietly, like layers of snow on a roof, each one light by itself, but together heavy enough to matter. You don't know when the weight will become too much. Only that for now, the structure still holds. And so you keep watching. You keep listening. You let routine carry you when alertness wavers. And you let discipline stand in for rest. In this world, being a sniper is not just about seeing clearly. It is about seeing clearly when your body would much rather close its eyes and drift. When every part of you whispers that it is time to sleep. And the war, indifferent, whispers back that it is not. Dawn arrives the way it always does here, quietly, without ceremony, a slow lightening of the sky that turns black into charcoal, charcoal into gray, and finally into a pale, cold blue. The ruins seemed to wake reluctantly, their edges sharpening, their shadows retreating into more honest shapes. What the night hid, the morning now reveals, every broken beam, every open window, every place where someone might be watching. A well-known historical fact is that many sniper engagements occurred at first light. The shift in visibility often caught people in motion, units repositioning, messengers crossing open ground, sentries changing posts. Dawn was a time of vulnerability, when eyes were still adjusting and routines were in transition. What's less often discussed is how disorienting this transition could be for those who had been awake all night. Your body is tired, your thoughts slightly dulled, and yet the world is suddenly brighter, fuller of detail. It's like turning the lights on in a room when you've been sitting in the dark for hours. Everything feels too sharp, too immediate. You blink several times, letting your eyes adapt. The street you watched in shades of gray now shows subtle colors, rust on metal, the faded yellow of old paint, the dirty white of snow trampled and mixed with ash. It feels almost indecent, this return of color, as if the world is pretending to be normal for a moment. Your spotter whispers about movement near a collapsed wall. You follow the direction, bringing the scope around, letting the crosshairs settle. A figure moves cautiously, half hidden, pausing every few steps. The posture is tense, careful, the universal language of someone who knows they might be seen. You wait, you measure, you let the moment stretch, feeling the familiar narrowing of attention. The cold, the fatigue, the hunger, the stories, the legends, the lost partner, the new one, all of it compresses into this single point of focus. A lesser-known detail from battlefield reports is how often decisions made at dawn were influenced by exhaustion. The mind, caught between night and day, could be slower to judge distance, to confirm identity, to weigh risk. Historians still debate how many early morning incidents were shaped by this in-between state, when perception and reality did not always line up perfectly. You are aware of that risk now. You double-check, you wait for confirmation, the figure moves again, and the shape resolves into clearer detail. Your spotter murmurs a distance, a wind call. The routine unfolds, steady and familiar, even as your muscles ache and your eyes burn slightly. Another small, tired thought passes through you. The world is at its quietest and its most dangerous at the same time. Like a city just before it wakes, when the streets are empty and every sound carries. You hold, you breathe, you let the light do its work, separating shadow from substance. The moment stretches, then shifts, and the figure disappears behind cover. No shot, just the release of tension, the subtle easing of a breath you hadn't realized you were holding. The sun continues its slow climb, and with it comes a strange, fragile sense of continuity. Night ends, day begins. The cycle repeats, indifferent to who watched through it and who did not. Historians still argue about how soldiers mentally marked time in such conditions. When days and nights blurred into one long sequence of waiting and alertness. Some speak of the comfort found in natural rhythms, the reassurance that dawn always follows darkness. Others point out that this same repetition could become numbing, each sunrise feeling less like a promise and more like a reminder that the ordeal was simply continuing. You feel both interpretations at once. The light is welcome, it means you can see more clearly. It also means another long period of watching. Another stretch of holding yourself still against cold, fatigue, and thought. As the ruins settle into their daytime shapes, you settle too, adjusting your position, resetting your focus. The world is visible again. And with visibility comes the familiar responsibility to observe, to judge, to decide. Dawn, for most people, is the beginning of activity. For you, it is simply a change in lighting, a new filter laid over the same patient, waiting task, and as the pale sun climbs higher, you remain where you are, a quiet presence in the broken city, carrying the accumulated weight of nights and days, knowing that the cycle will continue, and that you must continue with it. Somewhere between one dawn and the next, you begin to notice how the mind tries to protect itself by building small compartments. You file away fear in one place, routine in another, memory in a third. It's not something you consciously decide to do. It just happens, the way a room gradually fills with shelves when too many things need to be stored. A well-known historical fact is that many soldiers on the Eastern Front developed what later generations would call combat stress reactions. At the time, it went by different names, and it was often understood simply as nerves, exhaustion, or the natural wear of prolonged danger. For snipers, whose work demanded constant focus and long isolation, these reactions could take subtle forms. What's less commonly mentioned is how quietly they appeared, not in dramatic breakdowns, but in small changes: irritability, a shortened temper, a feeling of emotional distance, or an odd calm in situations where calm seemed inappropriate. You might notice that a loud noise no longer makes your heart race the way it once did. Or that it does, but only after a second, like a delayed echo. You catch yourself feeling strangely detached as you watch the street through your scope. The shapes move, the light shifts, and part of you observes it all with a cool, almost analytical interest. It's as if your mind has decided to step half a pace back. To watch itself watching, the sensation is faint, but unmistakable, like seeing your own reflection in glass while looking through it at something beyond. A lesser-known detail from veterans' letters is how often they described this sense of distance. This feeling of being both present and slightly removed. Historians still debate whether it was a sign of emotional numbing, a coping mechanism, or simply the result of extreme concentration over long periods. Perhaps it was all of these at once. Your new spotter whispers a routine update. You respond. The exchange is smooth, professional. You note, with mild curiosity, that you feel less of the nervous flutter you once did when a voice suddenly broke the silence. Experience has sanded down some of the sharp edges of reaction. That can be useful. It can also be unsettling. A small, inward joke drifts through your thoughts. Congratulations. You're becoming very good at being calm in situations that would make most people spill their coffee in panic. Unfortunately, there is no coffee, and the situations are considerably more serious. You think about how the brain learns to normalize what it sees often. Rubble becomes scenery. Distant explosions become background noise. The idea that someone might be watching you, just as you watch others, becomes an accepted condition rather than a constant shock. Normalization is efficient. It saves energy. It also quietly changes what you consider normal. A well-known historical observation is that many frontline soldiers found it difficult, later, to adjust back to quieter environments. Sudden silence felt too empty. Small, unexpected noises felt too sharp. What's less often discussed is how this adjustment began long before the war ended. In these moments when the extraordinary slowly became routine, historians still argue about how much of this psychological shift was reversible, and how much became a lasting part of a person's inner landscape. Some accounts suggest that time and distance helped restore a sense of ordinary scale. Others hint that certain habits of attention, always scanning, always listening for what might be wrong, never fully faded. You feel the early shape of that habit now. Even when nothing is happening, part of you remains alert, cataloging sounds, checking angles, noting changes in light. It's as if a small internal sentry has been posted and forgotten, continuing its watch without being told to stand down. The street remains quiet. Snow glows softly in the growing light. A piece of fabric stirs in the breeze, and your eyes follow it automatically. Then move on. The motion means nothing. You know this. Your body, however, treats it as a data point to be logged and assessed. Another faint, tired thought surfaces. Your mind is turning into a very serious librarian, carefully filing every sensation under potentially important, even when most of them will never be needed again. You don't fight this process. Fighting it would take energy you don't have. Instead, you observe it with the same calm attention you give the outside world. You note the slight emotional distance, the steady, narrowed focus, and you let them exist without judgment. Historians still debate whether this kind of adaptation was more protective or more costly in the long run. It allowed people to function in extreme conditions, to keep doing what needed to be done. It also, perhaps, made it harder to feel fully at ease when those conditions finally ended. As you lie there, breathing slowly, you sense that this quiet reshaping of the mind is one of the most subtle and most enduring aspects of your experience, not a single dramatic moment, but a gradual shift, like a landscape slowly altered by wind and weather. The ruins do not change much from hour to hour. Neither, in some ways, do you. And yet, beneath the stillness, small adjustments are taking place. Layers of habit and perception forming that will remain long after the snow melts and the echoes fade. You continue to watch, you continue to wait, and somewhere, in the background of your awareness, the mind quietly practices being what this place requires it to be: steady, observant, and just a little bit distant from everything that might otherwise overwhelm it. Mail arrives in small, irregular waves, carried by hands that look as tired as yours and by routes that seem to change every week. A folded letter, a postcard with a picture of a city that feels impossibly intact. A few lines written in careful script. These thin pieces of paper carry a weight that is out of all proportion to their size. A well-known historical fact is that letters from home were one of the most important morale boosters for soldiers on the Eastern Front. They brought news, comfort, and a reminder that a different world still existed beyond the ruins and the snow. For many, these messages were read and reread until the creases softened and the ink began to fade. What's less often mentioned is how complicated those letters could feel to someone in your position. You read about ordinary things: weather, family, a neighbor's new job, A celebration postponed because of shortages, and the normalcy can be both soothing and strangely painful. It's like looking through a window into a warm room while standing outside in the cold. You're glad the room is there. You just can't step into it. You imagine opening a letter now. Careful not to make noise. Holding it close enough to see by the pale light. The paper smells faintly of something that is not smoke or dust, perhaps soap. Perhaps simply the clean air of another place. The words tell you that people are thinking of you. That they hope you are safe. That they believe in what you are doing. It's kind. It's supportive. It's also, in a quiet way, very far from your current reality. A lesser-known detail from soldiers' correspondence is how often they avoided describing their actual conditions in detail. Especially to family, they would write about the cold in general terms. About being busy. About missing home. The long hours of stillness. The tension. The specific fears. These were often left unsaid. Either to spare loved ones worry or because the words felt inadequate. Historians still debate how much this self-censorship shaped the emotional distance between front and home. Creating parallel worlds connected by paper but separated by experience. You feel that distance now as you fold the letter back into your pocket. It's comforting to know someone's voice. Even in written form, it's also a reminder of how much of yourself you have temporarily set aside. The person who once worried about small, everyday problems now measures time in watch rotations and light changes. In the space between one quiet hour and the next. A small, gentle joke drifts through your thoughts. It's strange how a few lines of handwriting can travel hundreds of kilometers, survive snow and mud, and still end up making you feel both warmer and more homesick at the same time. Paper, it turns out, is surprisingly powerful. Your spotter gives you a quick glance. A silent question, you nod. The routine resumes. The scope frames the street. The world narrows again. A well-known historical reality is that some soldiers carried letters with them into combat, keeping them close as a kind of talisman. What's less often discussed is how these personal tokens could become emotional anchors. Small pieces of another life that helped maintain a sense of identity amid the uniformity of war. Historians still argue about whether such reminders made the strain easier to bear or whether they sharpened the ache of separation. Perhaps, like most things here, they did both. You think about the contrast, the careful, gentle curves of handwriting versus the jagged lines of broken brick. The softness of remembered voices versus the hard, cold feel of the rifle stock under your cheek. Both are real. Both exist at the same time, even if they rarely meet. Another faint, tired humor surfaces. Your life now comes in two modes, extreme stillness and very emotional paper. It's not the balance you would have chosen, but it's the one you have. The letter stays in your pocket. A quiet presence against your chest. You don't read it again now. You let it be there. Like a small, steady warmth. The job, after all, is still the job. Watch, listen, wait. Historians still debate how much these connections to home influenced endurance and resilience. Some argue they provided crucial motivation. A reason to keep going through cold and fear. Others suggest they could also intensify longing, making the present feel harsher by contrast. From your position, the effect feels layered and subtle. The letter does not change the temperature. It does not shorten the hours. But it does remind you that the world is larger than this single street and this single day. As you settle back into stillness, the memory of familiar words lingers, softening the edges of the silence. It doesn't make the waiting disappear. It simply shares it with something gentler. And in that quiet sharing, you sense another thread in the complex fabric of this life, the way distant voices and present vigilance intertwine. The way hope and duty occupy the same small space inside you, each making the other a little heavier, and a little easier to carry at the same time. You begin to notice how the body keeps its own quiet record of everything it endures. Not in words, but in sensations that linger long after their cause has passed. A stiffness in the shoulder that never quite goes away. A faint ringing in the ears after distant explosions. The way your fingers sometimes tingle when the cold is especially sharp. As if they remember every winter they have already lived through. A well-known historical fact is that many veterans of the Eastern Front carried long-term physical effects from their service. Even when they avoided major wounds, cold injuries, joint problems, hearing loss, and chronic pain were common, the result of prolonged exposure and repeated strain. For snipers, who spent so much time motionless in awkward positions, the body paid its own quiet price. What's less often discussed is how these physical memories could surface even in moments of rest. You might shift your weight and feel a familiar ache, one that brings back the outline of a ruined wall or the pressure of concrete against bone. The body, it seems, is very good at remembering where it has been. You adjust slightly now, easing your shoulder, careful not to disturb your position. The movement is small, almost invisible, but it feels necessary. The rifle settles again, and with it, that sense of alignment between tool and body that you have learned to cultivate. Still, the ache remains, a low, steady presence. A lesser-known detail from post-war medical notes is how some soldiers described feeling as if their bodies had learned the cold. Even in warmer climates, they reported sensitivity to drafts. A deep chill that seemed to come from inside rather than from the air. Historians still debate how much of this was physiological and how much was psychological. But the experience itself was real enough to those who felt it. You think about how long you have been lying in variations of this same posture. Day after day, night after night. The human body is remarkably adaptable. But it is not without limits. Muscles tighten, joints complain, circulation slows in places that do not move often enough. You counter these effects with tiny exercises, subtle tensing and releasing. Controlled shifts, all done under the cover of noise or darkness. It's a strange kind of invisible routine. Like practicing a dance that no one is meant to see. A small, dry thought passes through you. If there were medals for remaining uncomfortable with perfect stillness, you and your fellow snipers would be very well decorated. Unfortunately, such awards exist only in the imagination. Your spotter murmurs about a change in light. You respond, adjusting your scope. Letting your eyes refocus. The street looks the same. But you know better than to trust first impressions. You scan carefully, letting the practiced rhythm guide you. Historians still argue about how much these long-term physical strains affected post-war life. Especially for those in specialized roles. Some accounts suggest that the body gradually healed. That time and warmth and ordinary movement softened the old stiffness. Others hint that certain sensations never fully faded, that they became part of a person's baseline, a quiet reminder of years spent in conditions far from gentle. You feel the beginning of that reminder now. Not as pain, exactly, but as awareness, a sense that your body is keeping track, even when your mind is focused elsewhere. It's like a ledger written in muscle and bone, noting each hour of cold, each careful hold, each recoil absorbed and each stillness maintained. Another faint, inward joke surfaces. Apparently, your skeleton has decided to start its own memoir. It's very detailed, and it doesn't ask your permission. The humor fades, leaving behind a soft seriousness. You realize that this role marks you in ways that are not immediately visible. Even when you are perfectly still, even when nothing is happening, the effort leaves its trace. The cold works its way into joints. The tension settles into muscles. The long, careful concentration etches itself into posture and habit. You shift your attention back to the scope, letting the body find as much comfort as it can within the narrow limits of your position. The ache becomes part of the background, like the wind or the distant rumble of guns, something to be acknowledged, not fought. And in that acceptance, you sense another layer of what it means to be here. Not just the mental discipline, not just the emotional distance, but the quiet, accumulating record kept by the body itself. A record that will travel with you long after this street and this winter and this particular watch have passed. Whispering, in its own wordless way, of hours spent lying still in the cold, waiting for a moment that might, or might not, ever come. Rumors of an end drift through the lines the way fog drifts through ruins, soft, uncertain, impossible to pin down. Someone heard that the front is shifting. Someone else says a major push is coming. Or that a city has finally fallen. Or that talks are happening somewhere far away. None of it is confirmed. All of it is repeated. Quietly, as if speaking too loudly might make the hope vanish. A well-known historical fact is that during the later stages of the war, news of major offensives and breakthroughs spread quickly among soldiers, often faster than official confirmation could follow. Whispers of victory, retreat, or encirclement traveled from unit to unit, carried by messengers, wounded men, and the simple human need to know what the larger picture looked like. What's less often mentioned is how emotionally complicated such news could be. The idea that the end might be approaching did not bring simple relief. It brought questions. How much longer? What would after look like? Would the habits of stillness and alertness simply switch off, like a lamp, or would they linger in the dark for a while? You lie in your position and listen to your spotter murmur about a report he heard, something about movement far to the west, about lines bending, about the enemy pulling back in some sectors. It's vague. It might be true. It might be wishful thinking shaped into a story. Still, the words land softly, like a promise written in pencil. A lesser-known detail from veterans' accounts is how some soldiers felt strangely unsettled by the idea of the war ending. Not because they wanted it to continue, but because the structure of their days, however harsh, had become familiar. Watch, wait, rotate, eat, sleep, repeat. The thought of that rhythm breaking, of having to learn a different way to exist, could be quietly daunting. Historians still debate how common this feeling was, and how much it was a temporary reaction to prolonged stress versus a deeper difficulty in imagining life beyond constant vigilance. You notice your own reaction. A small lift in the chest at the word end, quickly followed by a cautious tightening, as if your mind is saying, "Don't get ahead of yourself." Hope, here, is handled carefully, like a fragile object that could crack if squeezed too hard. You return your attention to the scope. The street looks the same as it did yesterday. And the day before that. Rubble, snow, shadow. The world, at this scale, does not announce grand turning points. It changes slowly, almost shyly. A faint, tired joke flickers through your thoughts. The war might be planning a dramatic finale somewhere. But right now your personal episode is still titled, Waiting. Again, it's not very cinematic, but it is accurate. Your spotter adjusts his position and whispers another routine update. The ordinary continues. And yet, beneath it, there is a subtle shift. A sense that the long story you are part of is moving toward a different chapter. Even if you can't yet see the page. A well-known historical reality is that when fronts finally moved and battles ended, many soldiers described a strange mix of relief and disorientation. The constant tension that had shaped their senses for years did not dissolve instantly. What's less often discussed is how the anticipation of that moment could begin long before it arrived, coloring the waiting with a new, uncertain tone. You feel that tone now. The cold is still cold. The rifle is still heavy. The shadows are still watched with care. But somewhere, quietly, the idea of a future beyond this position exists. Like a distant landmark just coming into view through the haze. Historians still argue about how much this anticipation affected behavior in the final months of fighting, whether it made people more cautious, more reckless, or simply more tired. From where you lie, it feels like a soft, persistent question in the background. How many more nights like this? You don't know the answer. So you do what you have learned to do best. You stay still. You watch. You breathe. You let the possibility of an ending exist without letting it distract you from the present. In the quiet between one whispered update and the next, you allow yourself a single, gentle thought. That one day, perhaps, the only thing you will have to aim at is a memory. And the only thing you will have to listen for is the slow, ordinary sound of a world that no longer needs you to be perfectly, painfully still. The front begins to move in a way you can feel even without maps or official announcements. The distant thunder of artillery no longer stays distant. It rolls forward, day by day, like a slow tide. The soundscape changes. Fewer isolated cracks. More sustained, rolling barrages. The air itself seems to carry momentum. A well-known historical fact is that during the Great Soviet Offensives of 1944–1945, like the Vistula-Oder push and the final drive toward Berlin, the Red Army advanced with a scale and speed that reshaped the entire front. Cities fell, lines shifted, and positions that had been static for months were suddenly overtaken by movement. For snipers, this meant that the quiet, patient world of fixed observation posts was gradually replaced by something more fluid and uncertain. What's less commonly mentioned is how disorienting this transition could be for specialists whose entire routine was built around stillness. You had learned to read one street, one set of ruins, one pattern of light and shadow. Now, Orders come to prepare to move. To abandon hides you know as well as your own hands. To pack and be ready to follow advancing units. The familiar geometry of your world, this window, that corner, the precise distance to that broken wall, starts to lose its relevance. You feel it in the way you scan now. Not just for targets, but for routes. Where could you move if the line jumps forward? Which alleys lead out? Which collapsed stairwells are still passable? The map in your mind, once so focused and detailed, begins to stretch outward, trying to include a future that involves motion instead of waiting. A lesser-known detail from late war accounts is how some snipers were temporarily reassigned during rapid advances, acting as scouts or overwatch for moving infantry rather than remaining in long-term hides. The skill set was the same: observation, patience, precise fire, but the rhythm changed. Instead of hours of immobility, there were shorter halts, quick setups, sudden relocations. Historians still debate how effectively this transition was managed and how it affected the performance of highly specialized marksmen accustomed to static positions. You imagine what it will be like to leave this place, this patch of ruins that has become, in a strange way, a kind of home. The broken beam you use as a reference point, the pattern of bricks that tells you exactly where your blind spot begins. Even the wind seems familiar here. The way it curls around the corner and whispers through the same gaps every day. The idea of walking away from it all feels both relieving and oddly unsettling. Like saying goodbye to a difficult but long-known companion. Your spotter whispers about orders filtering down. About preparation, about the possibility of moving up in the next rotation. His voice carries a note of cautious anticipation. You hear it in yourself too. The waiting may finally be giving way to something else. Action, movement, progress. The words sound good. They also mean uncertainty. A faint, tired joke surfaces. After mastering the art of becoming invisible, you may now have to master the art of walking in a straight line with all your gear without tripping over history. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, but it's honest. You look through the scope one more time at the street that has filled so many of your hours. Snow lies in familiar drifts. Shadows pool in their usual places. Nothing dramatic marks this moment. No ceremony. No final glance exchanged between you and the ruins. Just the knowledge that the pattern is about to change. A well-known historical reality is that many soldiers described the final phases of the war as emotionally complex. Relief at the prospect of victory mingled with exhaustion, with the weight of what had been seen and done, and with a quiet anxiety about what came next. For snipers, whose world had been so narrow and intense, the idea of returning to broader, faster-moving operations could feel like stepping out of a small, dim room into bright, open air. What's less often discussed is how some felt a strange loyalty to the stillness they were leaving behind. The routines, however harsh, had given structure. They had taught you how to breathe, how to focus, how to exist in a world reduced to a rectangle of glass and a few whispered numbers. Letting go of that structure meant trusting that you could be something else again. Something more mobile, less anchored. Historians still debate how long it took for specialists like snipers to mentally adjust from static warfare to the rapid advances of the war's end, and how this shift influenced both their effectiveness and their long-term sense of self. Some accounts suggest an immediate surge of energy. as if motion itself washed away months of tension. Others hint at a lingering caution, a habit of stillness that did not vanish just because the landscape began to change. You feel a bit of both. There is a lightness at the thought of not lying in the same position for endless hours. There is also a small, quiet reluctance, like the hesitation before leaving a place that, for all its danger and discomfort, has shaped you. The artillery rolls again, closer now, more confident. The front is breathing in, preparing to move. You and your spotter exchange a look, brief and wordless. Whatever comes next, it will not be another long, identical watch over this same stretch of rubble. Another gentle, inward thought drifts by. You have spent so long mastering how to be perfectly still that learning how to move again might feel like learning a new language. Hopefully, the grammar comes back quickly. You settle into the last moments of observation here with a kind of quiet respect. Not for the ruins themselves, but for the version of you that learned to exist within them. The patience, the restraint, the ability to hold a breath and a thought for as long as necessary. Soon, the order will come. You will pack, shift, follow. The narrow world of the scope will open, just a little, into something wider and less predictable. And as you wait for that signal, feeling the air tremble with distant movement, you understand that this transition, this gentle, unsettling slide from stillness into motion, is another part of why this life leaves such deep traces. It teaches you how to stop, and then, just as quietly, asks you to start again. The last watch in this place feels different, even though, on the surface, it looks exactly the same as all the others. The same broken walls, the same pale light sliding across snow, the same quiet wind moving through empty rooms. And yet, you sense a gentle loosening in the air, as if the city itself knows that this long chapter is about to close. You lie in your familiar position, rifle steady, breath slow, letting your eyes travel over every line and shadow one more time. The ruined street has become a kind of map inside you. You know where the bricks are darker with soot, where the snow always drifts a little deeper, where the light catches a jagged edge and makes it flash like glass. These details have filled your days and nights, as intimate to you now as the lines of your own hand. A well-known historical fact is that as the war in the East drew toward its end, many forward positions were abandoned not in dramatic battles, but quietly, as lines advanced and old strongpoints were simply left behind. The front moved on, and places that had once been fought over inch by inch became, almost overnight, just another stretch of shattered ground. Snipers, whose world had been so precisely bounded, had to let go of these small territories of attention and follow the broader current of events. What's less often mentioned is how personal that letting go could feel. You have invested hours of focus, layers of caution, and a great deal of quiet endurance into this single view. Leaving it is not like closing a book. It is more like standing up from a long meditation. Your legs slightly unsteady, your senses needing a moment to adjust. Your spotter whispers that the order will come soon. Not now, but soon. Prepare. You nod. A small, controlled movement. The routines begin to shift from watching to packing, from stillness to readiness. You glance once more through the scope, not searching for a target, but simply taking in the scene, as if committing it to memory. Historians still debate how moments like this, these quiet transitions, were experienced by those who lived them. Some describe relief, a lightness at the thought of change. Others speak of a strange melancholy, a sense of parting from a place that, for all its danger, had become deeply familiar. Perhaps both are true, existing side by side, just as fear and calm have so often done here. A faint, gentle humor surfaces. You've spent so long trying to be invisible that now, when it's time to stand up and move, it almost feels impolite to the ruins. As if they might whisper, "You're leaving already?" You answer them only in your thoughts, with a quiet thanks for the shelter, however imperfect, they provided. You ease the rifle down, keeping movements slow and deliberate. Even now, discipline does not switch off instantly. It lingers, like an echo. Your muscles remember how to be careful. Your breathing remains soft. The world, for a moment, seems to hold still with you, as if offering a brief pause between one long sentence and the next. This is not the end of the war. It is not even the end of your role within it. It is simply the end of this particular watch, this particular stretch of waiting. And yet, it carries the weight of everything that has come before: the cold, the hunger, the nights, the stories, the partners, the near misses, the quiet courage of staying present when time felt stretched thin. You take one last look, then let your gaze lift from the scope. The narrow tunnel of vision opens into a wider world of light and distance. It feels almost spacious. And as you prepare to move, to follow the slow, inevitable shift of history, you carry with you the calm that this long stillness has taught you, the ability to breathe, to wait, to observe without rushing. These lessons, learned in shadow and cold, do not vanish. They settle into you, becoming part of the way you move through whatever comes next. The sounds of the front soften in your awareness now, as if they are drifting farther away, wrapped in layers of snow and distance. The sharp edges of rubble blur, the contrast between light and shadow gentle itself. Your breathing becomes the most noticeable rhythm, slow and even, like a tide moving in and out. You imagine the tension in your muscles slowly unwinding, one small knot at a time. The shoulders ease, the jaw softens, the eyes, which have worked so hard to remain open and searching, are finally allowed to rest. The world does not demand your constant watchfulness anymore, at least not in this moment. Thoughts begin to lengthen and drift, no longer marching in tight, alert formations, but flowing like quiet water. The cold becomes a distant memory rather than a present sensation. The ruins fade into softer shapes, like scenery dissolving into mist at the end of a long journey. You are safe here, in this slow, steady calm. The stories, the sounds, the long hours of waiting all recede, becoming echoes rather than demands. Your mind is allowed to float, to settle, to release the careful grip it has held for so long. Each breath carries you a little deeper into rest. In and out, in and out. The rhythm is gentle, reassuring, like a whispered promise that it is finally all right to let go. The last images soften, edges blurring, until they are no longer pictures but feelings: quiet, warmth, stillness, and the simple comfort of being carried by the flow of time rather than having to measure it. And as the world grows dimmer and kinder, a soft voice seems to murmur in the background of your thoughts. Not urging, not commanding, only soothing. It's time to sleep now. You've watched enough. You've waited enough. Let the darkness be gentle. Let the silence be kind. End of script. Sweet dreams.